Can you tell us about the day, Stephen, that you were not accepted to film school?
Oh, that was a wonderful time. Yes, I tried to get into film school in Central Florida, at the University of Central Florida, mostly due to the Blair Witch Project, the success of that coming out of there. That was a really inspirational movie for me. And there you had to go through a 2-year program to be able to be accepted into the film school. And so I had a bunch of friends. I was in a film club. I was doing a bunch of shorts and things with them. And then we all submitted. I was the weird genre kid. I was the one that wanted to make horror movies and action movies and comedy, and everyone else was kind of the artist filmmaker. So all of my friends ended up getting in, but me, because I was the weirdo. So that was disappointing, of course, because you spent 2 years trying to get into a program. But what I did was I ended up leaving the school at that point, moved over to Valencia College and finished up my AA degree, and then spent the rest of my college fund on my first feature, which was called The Night Owl, and went out with friends in the woods with a camera, like everybody starts with, and then ended up signing a really decent distribution deal on that. So by the time the movie was already on store shelves, my friends were graduating. So kind of kicked it off that way.
And of those friends that graduated, how many actually work in the film industry now?
A lot of them still work in the industry. A lot of them are out here in LA, actually, and we got to reconnect when we moved out here. And so it's kind of neat to see where everyone is from that group. Some are more successful than others, of course, but a lot of them, are still chasing the same dream.
And how did they tell you weren't accepted? Is just a form letter? Right.
Yeah, I got a form letter. I got a form letter saying that I wasn't accepted, and just kind of like, oh, sorry. And it was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have submitted with a short film about a young girl in a bikini chopping people up with samurai swords, I guess. But I thought it was cool at the time.
They didn't give you an answer. They didn't give you a reason why.
They didn't, no. I know that they had certain quotas to fill as far as other types of people to be allowed in. And so I'd heard that reasoning later, that I didn't fit the certain quota they needed for certain things. But it all worked out for the best for me.
So do you ever replay that if you had been accepted, where you think your life would have taken you? Or there may not have been much difference?
I mean, I would bet it'd be very different, because I got into a different school program. That school got me my first job out of college, which was camera operating at Nickelodeon Studios on the back lot at Universal, which I made a bunch of friends there that I'm still friends with today and still work with today too. So I think it definitely would have been a totally different path. A lot of the people in that group moved out to LA immediately, started trying to work as soon as they got out here. And I stayed in Orlando and built up a company. My company, Abyssmal Entertainment, celebrates 20 years next year, which is exciting. Oh. And so started building up that multimedia company and getting more and more clients and starting to do more and more films and producing for hire. So yeah, I'm pretty happy the way everything turned out as far as that one rejection letter.
And do you think that rejection letter did you a favor in that it made you want to take risks? Because you kind of had this chip on your shoulder, or maybe you didn't, but just that you were willing to try something that you weren't going to take the safe route?
I feel like I'm definitely a risk taker in situations like that. I'm always the one in the video game that runs into battle suicidally. And so I started early. I started when I was 16. I got my passion pretty quickly and knew that I wanted to go into movie making. And so when I was 16, I grew up in the Florida Keys on an island, so there wasn't nearly as many opportunities, but I went and got a job at the local cable access station. I started managing a Blockbuster Video. I got an internship with our film commission. So the first films that I ever got to go on was True Lies with James Cameron. So being there on the 7 Mile Bridge when they land the Harrier jets and they're blowing up cars and stuff and hanging Jamie Lee Curtis out of a helicopter, I was like, wow, every movie's going to be like this, which it is not. I'll come to find out later. But
any other impact that rejection had on you?
I think the one thing about the rejection letter was it kind of gave you a place where you had to make a choice. It's like, okay, what am I going to do now to get over this? Because these people said that you're not good enough to be this in this program, but I still felt pretty confident. And so my goal was, I knew that I needed to make a feature. I knew that feature films were where all the real money was, and you can get into video stores and do all these different things. So that first year I made 6 short films in a row, because I was like, if I make 6 short films, all a feature is one really long short. So if I can make 6 shorts in a row, then I'll probably teach myself enough to be able to go and make a full movie. And so that's what I did. And just using friends and everything, you know, went and did it. And then I started getting a reputation for myself in town because they're like, well, how did this 23-year-old idiot get a movie in Best Buy? And all the older people that were all upset because they're like, well, we've been trying to, you know, do this for years. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I just went to the video store and saw who was selling movies. And I called them and said, hey, I have a movie. Do you want to sell it? And they said, yes. And then you're in Best Buy. And people are so confused. But it seemed to me, just at the time, common sense. You figure out how that pathway works. And then once you get the machine working, then it all works out.
Can you expand on that a little bit more? Was it really that simple as finding who's the distributor on this film, finding their number, calling them?
I mean, to me, because I managed video stores since I was 16. So I kind of understood how the video store process worked. I knew that you would have different chains between studios to distributors to home video markets. So I kind of understood that whole process at the beginning. And then when DVDs came out in the late 90s, that totally changed the home video market. And those were so much cheaper because at the time a VHS tape cost $80 a piece and a DVD comes out and it costs $20. So you're already like, oh, well, this digital format's completely changing the way the market works because Blockbuster could buy 5 times as many DVDs as one movie. So that's when they started doing the Guaranteed to Be Here and everything switched over to DVD. So then when I was in college looking at home video, I was like, all right, well, I understand how this works. And I knew I wanted to make a low budget horror movie. So I literally went to Hollywood Video and looked at all the boxes of low budget horror movies that came out every week or every other week and saw what company is on the back of this box. And it wasn't Universal, it wasn't Sony, you know, it was very small companies, Brain Damage Films and whatnot. And so you would look that company up because I'm like, all right, well, this company is the one that sold to this video store. They're getting movies out there. And I just happened to luck out with the very first company I called, said yes. And you know, we ended up getting some money from it and it paid off the movie. It wasn't a lot of money, but we didn't spend a lot of money at the time. So it all kind of worked out that way. Nowadays, it's gotten obviously a lot harder. Well, it's just as easy. It's just harder to make money because you can get your movie out wherever you want nowadays, or you can put it on YouTube and get 100 million views if you want, you know, if you technically could. But back then you didn't have YouTube. This was back in 2002, 2003. And so video stores were still prominent, the prominent way to get movies, but the digital revolution was happening. And so it was easier to get your, you know, $3,000 horror movie on a DVD on a shelf at the time. Whereas nowadays that probably isn't going to happen.
When did you leave Blockbuster?
Well, I went to college. I was at Blockbuster for 3 years in the Keys. And then when I went to college in Orlando, I worked for another video store called the Video Superstore. And I was there for 2 years, I think. And then that store ended up going under. Like during the whole downfall of video stores, you know, eventually when Netflix came out, back then it was a service where you they mailed you a DVD in the mail. When that started happening and people didn't even have to leave their house anymore, then video stores started going away and Blockbuster couldn't keep up because they didn't believe in that at the time. And mom and pop video stores, like they were just, you know, they couldn't keep up with it either. So at that time, the whole video market kind of fell out. And that's why I got out of that business.
What's the difference between obsession and passion?
Passion is something that I kind of feel like passion is a magical dream place. It's like, you know, you desperately want to get to this point in your life or to this place in your life. And you're so passionate about making it to there that you're willing to do anything you can to get to that spot. Obsession is more so forcing a way to get what you need. It's not necessarily like a magical dream place. It's a goal that you have to accomplish no matter what. And so you have to force yourself to do whatever it takes to be able to get to that goal. But even at the other side of that finish line, it's not nearly as exciting as getting to fulfill what you're passionate about and getting the acclaim of that and the satisfaction of that, I think.
Okay, so a variation of that question would be, what's the difference between an obsessed filmmaker and a passionate filmmaker?
I also think an obsessed filmmaker versus a passionate filmmaker is going to really enjoy all of the steps that it takes to accomplish what they want. Whereas an obsessed filmmaker has to do it. You know, they're obsessed. It's a laser-sighted vision of what they need to accomplish in order to then feel as if they have satisfaction. But along the way isn't nearly as fun as someone who's living out their passion.
Do you think that there's a difference in the how relaxed someone is? You know, if you're forcing something, even if you claim to love it, it's not really that enjoyable. Whereas if you're okay with something not working out, and I don't know, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but it seems like there's a fine line between the two.
There's definitely a fine line between the two. I feel like the passionate are a little bit more comforted, and you're confident in yourself at some point. You know, I remember people used to always say, like, oh, you're great. Your movies are great. You're great. You're awesome. And you're like, oh, you know, thank you so much. Like, oh, no, it's too much. It's too much. And then at some point, I feel like you kind of have to believe the hype in yourself to overcome that confidence. Not be overly confident, but just to be like, you know what? I do have this. I can be confident about it. I can control everything. I don't have to go crazy because I actually am talented. I feel like there comes to a point where you realize that, and that's a comfort that a lot of people don't have that self-confidence to be able to get. And I feel like an obsessed person drives themselves crazy because they're constantly worried that they're not going to do something right, or their project's not going to turn out right, because they don't have enough faith in themselves and their team to be able to pull it off. And so a passionate person would hopefully overcome those hurdles and feel a lot more confident in themselves and their team, so that the process becomes a lot more enjoyable.
That's really interesting. So the kind of person that's like their own PR machine, and that they're kind of like, how could you not want my film or not want me, i.e. me? Whereas there's other people that overthink it, and well, maybe I did it the wrong way, and it's not. I should have changed this one part.
And confidence versus arrogance is another, argument, because you never want to be an arrogant person. But I feel like if you get to do what you love and are successful doing that to some capacity, I mean, that's your ultimate goal, is that's the passion. I mean, if I could be on set every day, I would, because I love it, and I love creating and working with a good team and collaborating. But there's definitely times where if you become obsessed with something too much, I mean, Lord of the Rings is a fantastic teacher of that. So you become too obsessed with one thing, you're not seeing the bigger picture.
Well, I think too, certain societies reward arrogance. Western society does, this sort of bravado, and I can handle this, and I'm a hero. And I think we bow down to that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're too maybe self-effacing, or if you're just too meek or whatever, for some reason, the rest of the world isn't going to notice you in the same way.
Right. Well, especially nowadays with the internet. I mean, the whole industry, you're waving a flag as hard as you possibly can, getting anyone to notice you in the sea of thousands of others doing the exact same thing you're doing. I always thought it was funny, people would talk about like the Steven Spielberg film class. It's like, oh, you have Steven Spielberg, you have George Lucas, you have John Milius, Francis Ford Coppola's hanging out. And everyone's like, oh man, what an incredible class where every single filmmaker can want to do something. Well, at the time, there was only like 7 film schools in the country, whereas now there's 7,000 film schools. So it's like, of course they were here, and they had those much more opportunities because there were so many less people doing it. Whereas nowadays, everyone and their grandfather can make a movie on their cell phone without leaving their house. And so that definitely dilutes things and complicates things. And so you're kind of trying to rise above that, or showcase what you're able to do and be successful with it. Because success, like, how do you measure the success of it? Is the movie coming out, getting on stores, being available, successful? Or do you have to raise $1 million in return being successful? Or do you have, where everyone's level is different, I think. And the ultimate goal is just to be able to do what you love and support yourself, really. I mean, a helicopter would be awesome too. I always wanted a helicopter, but one day.
When you came here from Florida, which was what, 6 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you have a specific idea of what success looked like? Or as long as you got to do what you love, you would have been happy and pay the bills with it?
I'm definitely a realist. And And I definitely appreciate the business side of show business and did a lot of producing for hire and have managed multiple budgets and crews and things. So moving out here, I knew that there was definitely going to be a big transition of somewhat starting over. But what I did when I left Florida was I tried to build up a national client database that I was creating content for through Abyssmal at the time, so that when we moved to Los Angeles, I wasn't out running around desperate for work or trying to get hired any way I could. I already had enough work coming through, so then I could focus locally on being more creative, focus more on promoting myself as the writer-director, getting a manager and starting to pitch to studios and things like that was more of my focus, knowing that the company pretty much consistently had enough work coming through it. So I feel like I was very lucky, but I also came out here prepared, like knowing that I wasn't going to show up and be like, all right, I'm giving myself 3 months. If I don't get to direct Batman in 3 months, I'm out of here, which I've had friends do. And I've had friends go homeless, and I've had friends come out saying, okay, I've got a 6-month window. If I don't make it in 6 months, I'm out, which is a horrible, horrible idea. It's like, no, it's a long haul. It's a long game. I mean, you look at some of the biggest successful directors, they're in their 60s and 70s now. I mean, they are pulling up younger and younger people, but it's a long game for sure. So I definitely felt prepared for that and am aware of it.
Or the famous Harrison Ford quote about he just stayed, everyone around him he had a house he was staying at with a bunch of people, and all these people left and he stayed. And I know you've talked in another interview about how money is important. And I know as artists, we want to say, money's not important to me. I just want to be able to do what I want to do. And
oh, I do love money, yeah.
But it's a necessity.
Yeah.
It's not even just, whether it's for a flashy car or whatever, but it's a necessity, and the stress that lack of money causes.
Well, I think a lot of filmmakers, especially young filmmakers, don't understand is it's not about the money. It's about making the money back for your investors. Because the more money your movie makes, the more movies you get to make. People always give Michael Bay a bad rap. And I'm like, Michael Bay makes some of the biggest movies in the world and makes more money than almost any other filmmaker. Like, you can't be mad at him for that. Obviously, everyone's seeing his movies, and they may not be for you. There's plenty of movies out there. You don't have to watch Transformers. You can watch a million other films, So it's interesting from a business standpoint where you're kind of like, he can do anything he wants. Like, if I made a movie that made $1 billion, I could do anything I wanted. And that would be amazing. I would totally want to do that. So I think you kind of have to look at it from both sides, but a lot of filmmakers were like, oh, I want to make this movie, and there's a ton of art involved, in crafting and creativity, and you want to make sure everything is balanced, and that rarely ever happens. That's why a lot of people are like, oh, well, 98% of movies are terrible, and it's like, well, it's not that they're terrible, it's that to make a movie is a miracle. It's a flat-out miracle to make and finish a movie. To make a good movie is impossible, because everything is against it. So when you get all of those things together in a perfect storm, that is a unicorn. That rarely, ever, ever, ever happens. So I don't think everyone really understands that. I think it's you have to have the whole spectrum work together in order for it to be completely successful.
I like that. And what do you think is more of a miracle, the making of it or the finishing of the movie?
Finishing. I mean, I've had friends that made movies that spent money and never released them, or never did anything, and or they weren't happy with how it came out, so they just toss it out. And you're like, well, what about the 50 people's hard work and actors and doing all this to be able to make this movie? Like, you don't have any respect for those people. I can't stand when projects don't come out. Like, even if they don't come out the way you want them, they have to come out. You have to let them exist. Someone is going to like it. I mean, and we've made some pretty terrible movies for sure. I mean, I love low-budget horror movies, so I've made a bunch of those. And even recently, I was at a convention this summer, and someone came up, and they were quoting lines from this independent horror movie we made 10 years ago, and they're just like, I love this movie. And you're like, oh, there's the guy that bought it, that one. So there's room for everyone at the table, and people really, you wish more people would understand that, more filmmakers would understand that. The Christopher Nolans of the world, where it's like, it has to be this or else, screw everybody else. Like, that's ridiculous. There's movies for everyone, and there's millions of movies out there. So if this one's not for you, this one's going to be, there's plenty to go around.
Stephen, can you help us understand why it's impossible to make a good movie?
I think that there's so much against you to begin with. So even at the studio level, You look at a movie, let's take Justice League as an example. You know, you have a major studio backing a major franchise that's got 100 years of content built and fan base built behind it, and something goes wrong. Something happens, you know, and that movie gets tripped up. And then they make decisions that were probably not the right decisions, and it gets tripped up again. And then the movie comes out and it fails. And it's like you had all of these pieces. You have incredibly talented filmmakers, incredibly talented actors, an unlimited budget. You have all this going for you. How did that happen? And it comes down to some different, you know, there's obviously multiple reasons why it happened. And then they made the new Zack Snyder's Justice League, which came out, which, you know, some people liked more and some people didn't. And it's kind of like, you know, it's never going to be perfect. But like, how does something like that fail? It's almost like crazy to think that, how can they? I can totally understand the guy that's making the $3,000 movie in his backyard why it fails, because that person has to market the same as Avengers. And it's like, well, if you're not dropping $30 to $60 million in marketing for your $3,000 movie, you can't compete with those big movies. I remember back in the day when our movie came out on shelves, it came out, I forget what other movie, it was another big movie. It may have been Avatar. I think it came out with Avatar on video, a movie Andre the Butcher that we worked on. And they were next to each other in the video store shelves. I remember talking to someone saying, you know, look, when someone comes into the video store, they can pick the biggest movie of all time or our movie. They're literally next to each other. What is going to sell them? You know, this is the only marketing they're seeing at the time. And so it really leveled the playing field then. Now the playing field has gotten to where you have low budgets and ridiculous budgets. And so the field is so wide, there's not a lot of $30 to $60 million movies anymore. You know, they don't need to make those. They make low budget movies and big budget movies. And then everything else kind of gets lost in the process. But then you wonder like, well, why isn't this movie more successful? This movie's great. And it's like, well, maybe they didn't have enough marketing money. Maybe they didn't have this, which again, it's like, that's all part of the process. There's so many filmmakers that don't focus on marketing. And that's where all your money has to go, because you have to try to wade through this pile and pile and pile and pile of content. I mean, there's only over 900 channels now with 24 hours of content just on television. And then movie theaters and pay channels and everything else. It's like you have 1,000 options a night to pick out what you want to watch. How do you rise above to the top of that? That's a challenge. And it's a challenge that's very rarely ever successful.
I was watching a trailer about a used bookstore, and there was this one line that was just very profound. It was just, the internet took away the hunt. And I feel like it's the same for film. Because say whatever you want about Blockbuster, but there was an aspect, you could go in there and you were hunting for that gem. Maybe you, i.e. me, I wasn't about the one that had the 20 titles of all the same. I would never go to those. But I was hunting for this little obscure one, maybe the one that you were talking about that was next to the Blockbuster one. So now all of that is gone, because it was a process. And you couldn't, you know, you had the book with the, you'd have to, okay, who's the actor? Okay, and then, but it's too easy now.
Right.
So it took away a lot of that.
It's interesting too, the MySpace days for independent music, because that was a similar thing where the rise of independent music happened through MySpace, where these bands could make a page, put their songs on it, and then send it to people. That was the first time that had ever happened. And so all of a sudden, all these independent artists were getting picked up and found and discovered. And that was a really exciting time for that. The same with the digital revolution for film. It's like all of a sudden people are making movies at home. It's like, oh man, we can all make movies now. And at the very, very beginning, it was easy. And now, of course, it's gotten really so cluttered that it's difficult. But the industry is constantly changing and constantly evolving. I mean, now we have COVID, which is completely changing everything again. Just to be able to do a live in-person production, they're talking that it boosts, 30 to 40% of your budget just to be COVID compliant now. So, I haven't done in-person production in a while just because of those things. Like the budgets now are so much higher to follow the union standards. I actually switched over and started doing a lot of animation during the pandemic. Taught myself animation and then started booking animation clients, because then nobody has to leave their house. And it's really easy to be union because no one's interacting. And so we started doing more of that because, again, the world changes constantly and you have to keep up or figure out how to make it work. And now we're dealing with that with the industry with day and date releases and the streaming services, and the unions are all fighting over new media, which it's like, well, technically if Netflix has the same requirements as a YouTube video, Like, they should be considered different. So now, of course, we're fighting for that. So it's always a challenge. Like, it's challenging no matter what, but it just constantly makes itself more challenging because it changes so much. You're in a giant MC Escher painting, like trying to figure out how to get out. The staircases keep moving.
You said you're a realist. Are you okay with change?
I'm okay with change. I mean, I understand that it's a machine. The whole industry is a machine. And a lot of people only see the front of the box. And they're like, well, yeah, I can do that because I can see the front of the box. But it's like, once you figure out how the machine works, and it is very consistent. I mean, there's definitely Cinderella stories where someone does a project that's seen by the exact right person at the exact right time, and then their career explodes. That totally happens. But there's also a consistent way of going through it where you get in, you get representation, they set up meetings, you pitch your project, you go to all the studios you can, and then eventually somebody says yes. And that's more of the consistent way of doing it. Some people go out and try to fundraise for years or decades to make that one movie that they want to make, and then they make it. I mean, I've seen this 100 times. They go out and they make their dream project, and they didn't do it as best as they possibly could because they were limited on budget or talent or whatever. And the movie comes out, doesn't make any money, and then it's like, all right, well, I just spent 10 to 15 years on something that is a blip in the stratosphere of content. So it's kind of, you want to kind of figure out what exactly you want to do, I feel like. Especially out here, Los Angeles loves someone who's just one thing. Like, you're this one thing, you focus on that one thing, and then people know you as that one thing. And if you kind of say, okay, I want to do this one thing, it's a little bit easier than just saying, here's a movie, go and be free and make me money, but we don't have $30 million of marketing, and we don't have a major studio behind it, or you don't have major talent or whatnot. And so it ends up becoming problematic.
So you said some of the hardest parts for filmmakers are probably finishing the film. Has that ever been a struggle you've dealt with?
There's only been one project I've been on that hasn't been released. And it does drive me crazy. And it was an executive producer that financed it and hired us to make it. And he just didn't want to release it. He wanted to hold it for potential. Like, he wanted to sell the idea to someone potentially. And so he didn't want anyone else to watch the project. That's the only one that's really bugged me, because a lot of people put a lot of time and energy and work into it. And yeah, they got paid, but they still want to see their work come to fruition. There's been movies that I've worked on just as crew that haven't ever come out, or I produced a couple of projects that were only released in Europe. I produced a Disney Channel show that we shot in Florida for 66 days. It was a 4-month shoot. It's 26 episodes, half-hour sitcom, like a Hannah Montana style, 3-walled sets, laugh track. And it only got released in Europe. Like, never came here, only over there. And it's like, all right, well, I mean, it wasn't really my kind of show anyway, but it's interesting to kind of see how, again, distribution is such a huge, huge part of everything.
Some of the projects you're referring to are higher budget, but even on the small indie level where, let's say, someone crowdfunds and then they realize, oh, you know what, we don't have enough to finish the project. So do we go back to our followers, the people that invested in us in the beginning to get more, or do we just, I guess what I'm trying to say is the reality of it not being able to finish something because there's not enough funds, or we didn't like the way it ended up turning out, and learning that lesson, even if you think it's crap, and still staying with it and saying, I'm gonna put it out there. Is that more detrimental? I'm gonna put out crap, or I'm gonna finish it and keep my word?
I mean, I personally believe that you should finish it, especially as someone, as a producer or a director or someone that's higher up on the project. Like, you kind of have a responsibility, I feel like, to everyone involved, and someone's going to like that project. Now, I feel like you probably wouldn't, like, I wouldn't want to get involved with a project that I knew was going to be crap, that I knew was kind of like, okay, this is way too low budget or way too guerrilla. And there's a lot of times where I'm like, I won't do anything illegal. So even today, I'll get people that call and they're kind of like, well, yeah, if we just go and steal this shot, I'm like, no, like, I'm not, it's illegal. Like, you can't do that. Like, I'm not going to do that. There's so many ways around that too, that you don't have to be illegal to do things, or use private property, or find, I mean, there's a lot of ways to make a low budget look big, for sure. And so it definitely frustrates me when a project doesn't come to fruition. And even if it's bad, it's like you should still at least, I mean, someone's going to see the movie and like it, you would think. But I would never want to be involved with a project that I thought was going to be a disaster. I mean, nobody wants a project that's going to be a disaster. Like, you always hope it's not going to be a disaster. And certain things turn into disasters because of different reasons that are most of the time out of your control. But I mean, I do believe that every project should be finished just out of respect to the cast, respect to the crew. Because I mean, I could see if it's a one-day shoot with some friends that turned out bad, and you're like, we don't need to release this because someone drank too much on set or something and did it all wrong. But I would think for a legitimate project, like, it's amazing to see some feature films that don't come out, and you're like, how did you not? You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this. You're just not going to ever release it. Like, that's crazy to me. Even if you release it, I get that there's certain distribution deals where you can't have any chance to make your money back. But at some point you have to be like, all right, well, then it's a write-off. And we're going to put it out there just to have it out there, and then try to move on to the next one, or, hopefully find new investors or whatnot.
We had this comment come in the other day under one of our videos, and it's, the thing that no older, quote, successful artist understands is that just make it is not an option when you are a young artist and have to work in a cafe part-time to survive.
I feel like there's a lot of people that give that advice. Just go out and make it. Go out and make your thing. And it's definitely a blessing and a curse. If you go out with your friends and you make something that is absolutely atrocious, that everyone thinks is funny, but then you show it to someone else and they're kind of like, well, you can't show anybody this. This is terrible. It'll make you look bad. You don't want to do that especially at the beginning. And I had that situation happen with one of our projects where we did a whole proof of concept and spent a lot of money and did a lot of time and energy and work, and we did it the best we possibly could. And then we showed it to some bigger people, and they were like, well, this is bad. You can't show anyone this. And it was like, oh, okay. And we had to pull it. We had to recut it and tighten it up and not show it to anyone, because they were like, this is detrimental to your career. If you're looking to build a career off of this isn't going to help you out. And so at some point you have to understand that too, that if you do run into that situation, then you make a decision. But I mean, everything comes down to marketing. You can release a movie and not do any marketing, and the movie exists, but no one's seen it, so they're probably not going to have watched it anyway. When you have it on your resume or you have it on your IMDb, it's like, oh yeah, you made all these movies. I haven't seen them, but that's cool that you made those movies. Because if you're not marketing it and getting the word out, then no one's going to watch it anyway, especially. So I think that it changes too. Nowadays, it's gotten so much cheaper and easier to make higher quality content. I mean, you look at, a professional camera package you can probably get for under 10 grand now, whereas 20 years ago, it would have been 200 grand. So you can make good quality stuff nowadays easier, but everything has to be good quality to make this ultimate movie that's really going to impress people, to launch you to that next level. And I think a lot of people don't have the ability to do that. I mean, I have friends in town that they were like, oh, you have cameras and lights and sound? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got everything. And they're like, oh wow, because I always wanted to make this video, but I have no way of doing it. And it's like, well, you find somebody else that does have it, and hopefully at some point, this is one of the good benefits of film schools. I'm not a firm believer in film schools, but you want to find your crew, you want to find your tribe. And if there's a way to build that, a film school is the best way to do that. The school itself is going to do whatever, but it's finding those other people that are like-minded, that maybe have equipment, and you try to build that up. And then especially now with social media, finding other people nearby you is a lot easier, and seeing who has a camera, who has lights, who's an actor, and then trying to put something together that hopefully isn't horrible. Or you start doing horrible things and say, okay, well, this was fun, but now let's do something better. Because every time you do it, it's only going to get better and better and better, hopefully. And if it's not, then maybe you should look into a different career, because it might not be for you.
Well, and if you didn't go to a film school, you can still find your, quote, tribe, but I think it would take a little bit longer. But I mean, you can meet fantastic people on Craigslist. You can meet also some scary people on Craigslist. But, or you could find people on Mandy or whatever, and it might just take longer to piece together reliable people that you have the same personality type. You can work well together, And
I think it's definitely a stigma in the industry, which I don't disagree with nowadays, where it's kind of like, hey, looking for a crew to make this movie, paying you in lunch and IMDb credit. And it's kind of like, if I was 20, I would have been like, that's awesome. I want to totally jump on that guy's team and do this. But at 40, I'm kind of like, all right, well, what are you doing, kid? Like, you need to pay those people because they have rent and families. And so it's definitely become a problem to where our industry also doesn't really put the value in what exactly we're bringing to the table, because I think so many people don't understand it. I always compare it to when I go get my car fixed. I have no idea how to fix a car. I don't know where anything. I barely can put the gasoline in, let alone know what the engine does. So it's like, those guys are like, well, I work for $80 an hour. And it's like, okay, here's your $80 an hour, go fix my car, because I have no idea what you're doing. But then when someone comes to a filmmaker or a camera operator, someone is like, oh yeah, I work for $80 an hour. And they're like, what are you talking about? All you do is press a button. And like, there's a strange mentality around the industry about that devalues what exactly we do. And you watch these big movies, and there's 1,000 people's names in the credits. It's like every single one of these people had to do something to pull off this thing you just watched for 2 hours in your living room. So that stigma is unfortunate, because the devaluing of everything and telling film school kids, well, go out and work for free for the first 10 years. And it's like, well, how do you do that? Like, that's, you kind of need to pay your bills and survive. But then you have to get better. And it's always a cart before the horse story. It's like, how do you get better if you're not doing it? But then people would say, just go do it. And there's plenty of stories that someone is successful from just doing it, for sure, but it's a needle in a haystack, and that's going to happen a handful of times a year with 10,000 people trying. But I mean, a lot of this industry is luck and talent. I mean, I like to think that everyone has talent. Everyone's talented in the industry. So if you start off at a sea of 1,000 people and every single one of them's talented, and 3 people are going to get caught to move on, then it's luck. You know, it's really luck and networking, like getting as many people to know you exist as humanly possible is like the real key to the whole industry, because you're literally just floundering in a sea of thousands trying to have someone be like, hey, I'm really talented. And it's like, well, yeah, you're really talented. That guy's talented. That girl's talented. Everybody's talented. Everyone's good. Especially here in Los Angeles, it's like they've made the jump. They're here. They're strong. They're ready to fight for what they want. So it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of different schools of thought around it, and it's trying to figure out what works best for you in your situation is really the challenging one. Hopefully your grandparents are the neighbor to someone really famous, and they can just make a phone call and give you a career. Like, that's the easy way to do it.
Well, even with that, though, they've still got to show up, and they still have to perform in some way. So connections, I think, do help. I've never had any, but I have seen people who have, and it doesn't always guarantee them a job. They still have to, you know, and sometimes, and I know people are going to fight me on this, when things are too comfortable for certain people for too long, I think there's a lack of willingness to try. And that's what my next question was, that with certain institutions, and you say they advocate just, you know, working for free or doing different things, is that a very textbook response for people that have the money to go to them? Community colleges, I don't think they would probably give that advice, but maybe they would. I don't know.
I mean, I think I would feel that, and this is across the board with all industries. I mean, internships out of college or during college is pretty consistent, which is free labor. It's like you're working free labor in the industry of your choice to gain more real world experience. And that happens everywhere. That happens with doctors. That happens with, I mean, almost any industry. You still go and do a residency. You still have to go do internships with corporations to try to get into those positions you want, because you have to prove yourself that you're talented and qualified to be able to move up in the world. And that, so I do agree that it's the same way in film. It's like if you're in college and you're trying to get more experience. I mean, I internship when I was in high school and some during college, and I got great experience and I met lots of new people, and it definitely helped me out. But it's more so you're going to be working for free for 10 years, or the expectation that everyone else should work for free for 10 years. That's where it gets frustrating, because everyone's creative and everyone wants to do stuff, and it's a lot of fun to do things, and it's awesome. I mean, if I could be on set every day, I would. But at a certain point, you have to kind of decide, like, okay, now I'm working beyond my worth. Like, I need to actually make money, and I need to survive, and I need to support my family. And so you have to figure out what's the best way to do that. But I think that internships is a very common rule across the board of any occupation.
And it's advised from any college?
Yeah.
Whether like a prestigious 4-year or a local community college, which could have just as great of a teacher. It could be the same teacher, actually.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, some schools offer placement. Some schools have great reputations for getting people jobs out of college. And so it all kind of depends. I mean, in the writing, directing world, those are the two hardest jobs to get in the industry. If you're going out to be a grip or an electric, you know, you go work on the Avengers. Well, they're hiring 100 grips and they're hiring 2 writers for one movie. So it's like, there's lots of other opportunities. You get into a below the line position. You're a production assistant or makeup or, you know, yeah, G&E. There's a ton more work because they hire so many more of those jobs. And I have friends that just went into those and they're like, oh, they're booked for years because there's so much opportunity there. But for someone that wants to be a little more creative, that focuses on writing and directing or something, there's way less of those jobs. And I remember in 2009, I did a short film that got a lot of acclaim called 222. It was a graphic horror short, and we were getting calls from all over the place. Like New Line Cinema called up, and I was in Florida being like, oh crap, like we made a good short. Oh no, what do we do now? And I remember meeting with a management firm here, and we had a whole meeting, and they were like, well, what do you want to do with it? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, why'd you make the short? I was like, well, I wanted a calling card to show what my abilities were, to try to raise more awareness. And they're like, oh, you don't want to turn this into a movie? And I'm like, I mean, we could turn it into a movie. They're like, oh, you don't have a script ready to go? And I'm like, no. And they're like, oh, all right, well, thanks for coming by, you know, da, da, da. And I was like, wait, what happened? I didn't get this lesson. And I remember talking to one of the managers, and I was like, okay, so you're not going to sign me, but can I ask why? Like, I'm curious. This is all new to me. And he was like, look, we represent Joel Schumacher. This is back in 2009. We represent Joel Schumacher. We send him into meetings to try to get directing jobs. So when it's you and Joel Schumacher, in a meeting, or they have to decide between the two of you, who do you think they're going to choose? And I'm like, oh, well, Joel Schumacher, obviously. And they're like, yeah, that's the problem, is that we can't put you next to Joel Schumacher yet. Like, you need to do something big enough to be like, oh, this guy just did this. Oh, okay, that's who that is. And so it's the same kind of a thing. Like, you're constantly proving yourself all the way up the ladder, even though, I mean, I've pitched to a dozen major studios in town now. You know, I haven't gotten any yeses yet, but I've got open door policies and I'm in there and working the game and everything. And so it's exciting just to be part of the system and figure out how the mechanisms work and everything. But until something happens, or I get a lucky break or something that breaks you out of that, it's a lot more challenging for sure.
And now do you have answers ready for their questions? Like the magical, what else do you have?
Oh, every single project I do for a very specific purpose, especially shorts. If you make a short film, there's usually 3 reasons you make a short film. 1 is to do something fun with your friends. 2 is to take it to film festivals and try to win awards. Or 3, use it to try to make a feature, to try to get, to raise enough awareness and show your capabilities at a 0 budget or low budget, that way you could do on a feature level. So I feel like every project should be like that at this point, that you make a project for a very specific reason. I mean, every now and then you get a for hire job. Like, there's a new short that I just signed on to that's just a directing for hire, and it's a company that wants us to do this for them. And I'm like, sure, we can totally produce your content as well. But I think you need to have a plan, because if you do catch that lightning in a bottle, you need to know what to do with it. And I was definitely, I'm really curious, if I had everything prepared back then, what would have happened? Because now when I make a script, I do a full breakdown, I do concept art, I do a poster art for every single project I'm pitching. So it's like, here's this, there's one that I'm really in love with, and I did a full brand package. We developed a comic book and a video game app and everything. It's like, look, this is the whole brand, this is the marketing, this is how we would do it. And then you shop it that way, which is a lot better than, oh, I've got an idea, or I've got a script, and that's it. You kind of, at this point, need to do a little bit more legwork to be able to showcase what you can do. And some people do hypercut trailers. You go make a trailer with a bunch of other footage to be like, this is the feel that we're going for, kind of a thing, or concept art or whatnot. But yeah, it's a challenge no matter what. It's all an uphill battle. So the more you're prepared for it, the better.
Why do you say that all creatives have a creature living inside of them?
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Sounds like something I would say.
You said it was like this creature that was always like, oh, we could do that. Oh, and I can make that. And it can be a blessing and a curse. And the curse is it won't leave you alone, because you're always thinking of these new ideas and how you want to make something.
Yeah. I really love this movie, The Tingler. That is a William Castle film starring Vincent Price. where Vincent Price is a scientist that discovers that fear is a creature that lives on your spinal cord. And the creature gets bigger and bigger. It feeds off your fear. And the only way to shrink the creature back down is by screaming. And the whole movie is about this. They get a mute girl who can't scream, and they scare her to force this creature to break out. And then the creature gets loose so they can try to experiment with the creature. But I always really enjoyed that premise because I feel that's the same way with creativity. You have a monster living inside you that is so desperate to do things creatively. And this goes back to passion versus obsession too, because it's like you go to bed sometimes, you're like, oh, I have an idea. Oh my gosh, this is a great idea. I got to write this down. I got to figure out a way to do this. I got to pitch this to somebody. I got to see about it. It's like a madness that I feel like kind of lives inside. And everyone has a bit of a multiple personalities, right? So you have this creature that lives inside of you that's just whispering these great ideas in your ear. And you're like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. Oh, I could totally do that. Oh, I could change this or blah, blah, blah. And so I like the whole idea that you have a friend that's with you, you know? So it's just, yeah. So your creativity is this creature that lives inside of you that is constantly forcing you to get excited about things and then trying to figure out how to accomplish them. But it is a bit of madness. It does drive you crazy sometimes because not everyone can just go out and make whatever they want at all times, not decently. And there's certain projects that you want to wait until you can do them correctly or hopefully do them correctly or get the right kind of budget you need or the right team. And so I think that every creative is a little bit mad, of course.
But it's almost as if it's coming from somewhere else. It's not really you.
I mean, I feel like everyone talks to themselves. Everyone has conversations in their head.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, who are you talking to? It's just you. There's no one else in there, right? Or is there someone else in there? So I always love that movie Identity, where they have the guy who's it's kind of a spoiler, I guess, but has all the different personalities that turn into people. And it's all the different elements of his personality, all these different people. And they're all different. But, you know, everyone works better in groups. Right? We like to work in groups. We like to work in teams. It makes things easier. So the idea that you have me, myself, and I, your trinity inside of you that's all working together to make things happen, I think is a comforting feeling to where the world isn't always 100% on your shoulders, even though it seems like it, because you have you, yourself, and I to help out, you know, and your little creative monster that lives on your spinal cord. It helps lift that weight because being in entertainment, you know, we have a very big responsibility. And you look at things like the Great Depression, you look at the history of movies. In the Great Depression, all movies turned to comedy because people desperately needed a way to escape how tragic reality was. And we've had that same thing happen this past year with COVID. People are trapped at home. Well, Netflix numbers are skyrocketing because they're stuck at home. They need that escape. They need entertainment to survive. And I really think that it's important, you know, what we do. It's not just for fun and giggles, and it seems like it to some people, but it is really important because a lot of people's livelihood, this helps them. It's their escape from reality. It helps keep them sane so their monsters don't get loose on them. And I'm really proud to be a part of all that, especially when you can provide someone entertainment with your work. I mean, that's an amazing, amazing feeling.
What year did that movie come out with Vincent Price?
Oh gosh, 60s.
Okay.
I'm not sure the exact year.
Interesting. And what's the title of it again?
It's called The Tingler.
The Tingler. That's right. You said that.
It was a William Castle movie, and they put buzzers all around the theater. So there's a part in the middle of the movie where the screen goes blank, and it's like, oh no, the Tingler's loose in the theater, and then starts shocking people, and people are screaming and jumping up and running around, and yeah, it's a good one.
So the only negative to having this creature, this metaphorical creature inside of you, is that it's frustrating because you can't get all of the projects you want done?
Well, it's hungry. You know, it's a hungry creature. Oh. And if it's not fed, it gets angry. And I ended up starting in video, and then a few years later ended up getting into photography because I was like, oh, photography is exactly like filmmaking, only it's one frame instead of 24 frames a second. So I only have to make one picture. And I have a lot more control, and it's a lot cheaper, and I only need one model or a couple models, and I can do whatever I want. And then I learned Photoshop, and I'm like, now I can really make whatever I want, composite people into crazy locations, because I need that creative outlet. As creatives, like we have to feed the beast. So, you want that, and that creature is hungry. And so you got to figure out ways to do it. And people, I think, that are creatives will find that way, either through writing or art or filmmaking or basket weaving or whatever is on their Etsy site. You know, you can find a creative outlet, but you kind of feel like you have to do it because of this starving monster inside of you that needs to be fed.
Did you always honor that creature? I mean, when you were growing up, did you have other plans for a quote unquote career? Were there other classes you were taking?
I never had a plan B. Like, not really. I really knew very strongly what I wanted to do and thought that it would be possible. I think especially the late 90s, like when I was in high school, when DVDs first came out, they had these things called special features, which you never got on VHS tapes. Very rarely would you get like a second VHS tape that had like behind the scenes. The only time you ever get to see behind the scenes is on like an entertainment news that would play for half an hour a night, you know, before the sitcoms came on, or an HBO special or something. So you never really got to experience what it was like behind the camera. So I remember starting to see these special features and being like, oh man, look at how they make these movies. Like, I didn't even think about it as a kid. I just thought these movies just came out of nowhere. They just poof, existed. But then you see the whole processes and making that magic happen, and being a child and having so many movies affect you as a kid. And, you know, I grew up as a horror kid. I mean, I loved slasher movies, and some people watch Star Wars. I didn't watch Star Wars until I was an adult. Like, I watched Freddy and Jason, and like this was where I like to escape to. And horror is a really important thing to me too, the horror genre, because a lot of people look at as horror as like, oh, it's exploitive, it's splatter, it's gross. Like, why do you want to focus on death? Like, horror doesn't focus on death. Horror focuses on life. You know, you as a viewer survive no matter what the movie. There's people that don't survive. And it really lights a fire under you, hopefully, to be like, man, I could have been that guy that just took a machete to the head, but I didn't. I lived. I need to take advantage of this. There's such an inspiring me. As a kid, I was so inspired because it's like, oh, look, I lived. No, I need to take advantage of this life while I have it before some crazy hockey mask killer shows up in the middle of the night. And granted, it's fun, or a lot of them are fun, but I always felt like that. It's an adrenaline rush. It's like a roller coaster. And then at the end, but you survive no matter what. And that's an exciting thing. And I like bringing that to audiences for sure.
How old was your dad when he found out he had terminal cancer?
48. I think he was 48, if memory serves. Yeah, I think he was around 48. And he got diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma, which is a kidney cancer. They removed a softball-sized tumor off of his kidney. He was a vegetarian, didn't drink, didn't smoke, you know, had a pretty healthy lifestyle, but had just gotten out of a really bad multi-year lawsuit that caused a lot of stress, which probably helped out a lot, I'm sure. But yeah, it was, at the time, they had given him 8 months. And so we pushed up our wedding and everything. He ended up lasting 8 years. He was a fighter, for sure. He definitely fought tooth and nail. And so ended up lasting about 8 years on it, which was great.
And where were you when you found out?
It's funny, I actually remember exactly where I was. I was working at the Video Superstore in Orlando, Florida, and he called while I was on a shift, and I remember going out and sitting in the car on my lunch break, I think, and he told me about it. I remember it very vividly. And it was just kind of like, oh, okay, you know, this big hit of what, you know, kind of how do you reevaluate your lifestyle and your life at that point? Because you're kind of like, oh, wow, okay. And it makes you really realize really quickly how sacred life is, for sure. But I remember sitting in my 88 Suburban in that parking lot when he called and told us, and it was like, oh, okay. And then trying to figure out what to do from there.
And when you walked back into the store, did the store look different in a way? Because your perspective, now everything was turned upside down?
I don't know if necessarily my perspective was completely turned upside down. It was more so of, okay, like, what do we do next? What's the next step? I'm definitely a very structured kind of person. So it's like, all right, if I have to accomplish something, what do I have to do to get there? Like, okay, what's next? we do surgery next. Okay, we do the surgery to remove the tumor. Okay, then what's after that? Then we start chemotherapy. Okay, so like, what's the plan to get to our goal of remission? So I think my mind was kind of more thinking that way than thinking about, oh, I'm going to go cry for an hour and a half, you know, and be sad. I think it was more so about, okay, here we are. What do we have to do to accomplish our goal to make this work, to make this better? Which of course you only have so much say in because it's a disease. But and then they started the processes, and you stuck around for another 8 years. It was crazy. It was cool.
How did that day impact his life, and how did that day impact yours?
He definitely made a lot of choices and changes after that. He moved back to his home state of Louisiana. He got closer to family over there. He ended up meeting a woman, Beth, who they started a relationship, and she had a big farm, and he started a farm, which he never had a farm before. We bought him goats for Christmas, I remember, or sheep and goats, because that was fun. And he started this farm. He was a lawyer and a judge for years, and so he kind of took to this retirement. He would have to go to Houston to do chemotherapy and through the MD Anderson Center. And then after a few of those years, he started traveling, trying to travel to places that he hadn't been to. He tried to kind of live the best he could. He got remarried during that to Beth, and, lived as much as he could possibly do. But it was interesting because at the end, I have two of my sisters and I went and stayed with them 2 weeks apart. So we each had 2 weeks with them. And I had the last 2 weeks, and I was leaving because our short 222 was playing at Grauman's Chinese Theater here in Hollywood, which was the first time I'd ever had a movie play in Hollywood, let alone at the Chinese Theater. It was a huge, huge deal. And I was there with him for 2 weeks, and then I took a flight to Hollywood and met my wife. She flew out from Florida. We went to this whole red carpet, had this whole incredible experience, got meetings from studios and all this different stuff. I put her back on a flight the next day because I had set up a few days worth of meetings while I was there. And as soon as she got on the flight and left, I remember going back and I was just hanging out, just looking at the Hollywood sign, soaking everything in. And then I get a call saying he's not going to last the next day. So it was a really crazy experience because it was like the highest and lowest point I think I'd ever experienced in the same time frame. And so I was like, well, okay. And so I went and booked a flight, flew back to the small town in Louisiana that he was in, canceled all my meetings, canceled everything. And yeah, he passed away the next day. And so it was a crazy whirlwind for sure. And what's even crazier is 3 months after that, my stepbrother ended up getting killed by an accidental shooting. And 3 months after that, my wife's mother died of cancer. So it was a very crazy year. And also our son was born right after she passed away. A few months after she passed, he was born. But it really, going back to the whole horror element, it really lit a fire to where it's like, all right, your life is not guaranteed. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. Like, you got to get going. You got to make sure that everything you're doing is impacting the way that you want it to go and to help you reach this goal that you've set for yourself. And so, soon after that, we moved out here and kind of changed the way we were doing things. And it's been great. It's been wonderful. But it's that fire that kind of keeps pushing. Because, yeah, you never know. And I've had friends that have passed away that are younger than me and stuff. And even during COVID, like, we've had friends pass away from COVID that, just didn't had their whole chance taken from them. And so, like, you see that and it's like, oh my gosh, and then your monster really goes crazy because it doesn't want to die either. And you really kind of got to figure out what's the best plan, to get what you want and where you want to be. And once you decalculate all of that, I feel like you use your secret decoder ring and see how the industry works. And you're kind of like, okay, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. You see what connects the dots. It does make it a little easier. But it's still pretty hard.
When you talked about a passionate filmmaker versus an obsessed filmmaker, do at times you check yourself because you realize, wait a minute, okay, I've seen somebody who had a thriving career and other people that I've known pass away. How much is this really worth obsessing over?
I'm definitely a workaholic. Like, I like being busy. I like having a lot of stuff going on at the same time. Though I get frazzled also too because of it. And I have a family. I have an 11-year-old son. So it's trying to find that work-life balance of being there for your family and then also continuing to push to be able to get to where you want to be. And it's definitely challenging at times. I just went away I was 6 weeks on the road doing shoots, and then had to go home for some family stuff for a couple weeks. And so even then it was like 6 weeks away from home is tough. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, well, I've got 2 hours a night of downtime that I could try to write something or try to put something else together, like while I'm on this trip, or I'm on a plane for 5 hours. What can I get done while I'm on the plane? Which most of the time you just watch movies because you're exhausted and you don't want to do anything. But it's trying to find that balance and also still enjoying things. You don't want to work yourself to death to where you're 80 years old looking back being like, oh man, I shouldn't have killed myself writing those 37 scripts when I could have just gone out and gone camping for the weekend or something with my family. And I think it's important to find that balance. It's not always easy to find it, but you're always trying. You're always trying to find it, I think.
Do you ever think about when you turn 48? I know you have many years to go before that happens.
Oh my gosh, no, I didn't think about that till now.
But
oh my God, I've got 8 years.
For anybody who's had a parent pass away, it's a weird thing that when you become their age, when they pass away, it's like this weird perspective that, I don't know, maybe I'm just the only one that thinks that way.
No, now I'm terrified. No, I didn't even think about that till you just brought it up.
Oh, well, no.
Great.
And
I'm going to go home now.
No, I mean, just in a way of you just see life
right.
in an interesting way. And it doesn't have to be tragic, actually.
Well, interesting too, my mother was diagnosed with cancer the month after I was born at 20. And she had Hodgkin's disease, luckily, which is the most curable kind of cancer. But the amount of chemotherapy she went through in 1981 has caused a lot of damage on her body now later in life. So now she's 61 and her heart is completely falling apart. She has a lot of really bad heart problems. And her heart's way too damaged for a transplant or anything else like that too. So now you kind of watch that side as well, and you're like, okay, you're trying to balance, everything else too with that, and how much time you have left with them, and what you can do to. And as a child, you're always trying to figure out what you can do to make your parents proud of you, right? So you kind of always have that in mind too. That it's like, okay, well, if she's still here, like, what can you do to be like, hey, look, I just did this thing that maybe they're impressed by, though they don't know about everything, so sometimes it's hard to impress you, like, oh, I got this thing happened. It's like, I don't know what that is. It's like, okay, cool. But I do remember the first time my movie came in a store, and I called my dad. And my dad was very skeptical of everything, and he was skeptical of, like, everyone's skeptical of the film industry when their kids go into it because they don't understand it. They don't understand how it works. They don't understand there's lots of work and you can make lots of money and there's lots of different things about it. It took my wife's parents forever to figure out. I don't know if they've still figured it out, like what exactly we do and how we survive. But I remember calling my dad and being like, hey, the movie came out today. He's like, oh, okay. And I was like, no, it's at Best Buy. You can go buy it. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, it's on the shelf. Like, you can go to Best Buy and pick it up. And he called me an hour later and he's like, you're not going to believe this. Your movie's at Best Buy. And I'm like, I just told you that. Like, you didn't believe me, I guess. And he was like, I just bought every copy. And I'm like, well, great. I know nobody else can watch it because you bought all the copies. But it's moments like that you want, of course you want your parents to be proud of you. And my mom's my biggest cheerleader. She's awesome. I do a lot of horror stuff. So it's like, she can't always promote everything to her friends, but at least now the new documentary she can. But yeah, you're always trying to find that approval from peers and family and friends and everything, I think.
Do you think it made you grow up faster?
When I grew up in high school, I was the oldest of 7 kids. My dad and mom divorced and remarried, and I had 3 step siblings and a half sister. And so I was the oldest of 7. So I felt then that I grew up really quickly, and I always had more than one job. Like, I started working at 16. Not that I had to work, I just like to work. I like to be busy. So I was working at the movie theater, the video store, the film commission, and the TV station all at the same time. And then the Keys are 180 miles long. People don't realize how big they are. So I was driving around 4 hours a day. I drive an hour north to school, 2 hours down to Key West to work, and then an hour home every night. which is fun in LA because someone's like, oh, I don't want to drive 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, I'll drive to the other side of the city. Like, it doesn't bother me. 2-hour drive, sure. But it's, I forget where we were going with that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's funny because the people, I don't want to drive over the hill. I don't want to go over, Laurel Canyon. And it's like, okay.
You should have put meetings around lunchtime. It's like, make the meetings at noon so you don't have to drive in 9 a.m. traffic.
Well, any time in LA is there's traffic.
It's all pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah. What else did your dad teach you in his final years?
I mean, I think the things I learned most from him in those final years was that life is not guaranteed. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. And seeing him get more and more debilitated and start, once the cancer spread to his brain and he didn't really understand like who you were all the time or what exactly was going on all the time, I think it was really like, oh man, like you really need to get your life together and figure out how to accomplish your goals. I think in entertainment, people are kind of like, oh, I want to be this, but they never really think about how to be that. They just assume at some point someone calls you and you're like, hey, I saw this short film you did. You're awesome. Do you want to direct the next Avengers movie? Which of course would be amazing, but it doesn't really work that way. So you got to try to figure out how to get to the point that you want. And everyone's point's different. I mean, some people want to go and be a makeup artist on a certain television show, or somebody wants to go and design props for something else. And there's different ways to do everything. There's no right way to do anything in the entertainment industry, but there are consistent ways that people have become successful. So I think one of the things that I've learned those last few years was to really laser focus like exactly what I wanted and then figure out the combination to be able to get to there as fast as I could. He and I didn't always see eye to eye. He was definitely a person that didn't understand a lot. Like he wanted me to play football. I can't play football. I'm like the least athletic person ever. But he played football, so it's like he wanted me to play football. Though he wanted to be a writer and his parents didn't want him to do that. So he had to do what his parents wanted. And luckily he didn't force that on me, but it was just kind of a different mentality. So you always kind of have that, besides the creature living in your back, you have this little nagging thing that always wishes that you had a little bit more time with him, that you could have done something that he would have been impressed by. And for me, my specific one was he was always obsessed with France, with Paris. Like he loves France. He went there in college, like backpacking, and like he always wanted to go back to France. And then 3 months after he died, our short got into the Cannes Film Festival.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that was it. That was the moment. That's the one I would have had where he would have been like, wow, you actually accomplished something. And, that was taken away. And I never got to have that moment. And I feel like that will be over my head until the day I die, that one nagging thing, which is really unfortunate. But, that's also something that's driving you to work harder and to get there quicker and to make it work, because now I have a son and I can encourage him to do what he wants to do. And he's awesome. So we're literally clones of each other. Like, I feel terrible for my wife. She has 2 of us now, but he's amazing. And what the world gives now to kids is incredible, because when I was a kid, I didn't have robotics programs in 3rd grade. Like, we didn't have all these awesome programs and website. We didn't have websites or anything to learn from. And he can do anything he wants. Like he built his own robots at 5 years old, and now he's really into molecular biology, which is interesting. He's 11. Obsessed with molecular biology, loves dissecting. He just dissected 9 animals last year. He loves exploring in science and everything, and it's really exciting to go on that journey with him and encourage him to do, whatever he wants. And hopefully, he won't have that moment looming over his head at some point in life that he didn't think he had made his father proud. And so that's something else I learned as a father now to try to work out with my son.
What was your writing process on your first screenplay?
My writing process of my first screenplay, I took a writing course in college and at Valencia College after I had left UCF. And during the course of the college, you had to write a script during the course of the class. And so I wrote the script, which ended up being my first screenplay there, I was really influenced by a humanities class that I had taken there that was basically like a biblical history lesson. I grew up going to a Christian school from kindergarten through 11th grade. So I'd read the Bible back and forth. Like I was definitely one of those smart kids that was like, well, wait a minute. The Old Testament says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And the New Testament says turn the other cheek. Which one does God want me to do? And it'd be like, but I was very inspired by the actual historical references. And so I wrote a screenplay based on the Book of Lilith, which is a deleted book of the Bible, about the true Genesis before. And so I wrote that script while in screenwriting class. And I was like, okay, if I can write a script, I realized very quickly, okay, to make a movie, you got to utilize what you have. So I'm like, we have a house by a lake. We have actors. We have this stuff. All right, I'm going to write a movie about a house by a lake, with the things we have access to that won't cost us anything. And so I wrote this script during that class. And I'm sure it had certain structures that you had to follow for your grades and everything, but that's how I did that first script. It was actually kind of sad about that is a couple years later, I made the movie, and then the movie came out, and I ran into that screenwriting teacher. And I was like, look, I made the movie off the script I wrote in your class. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yo, I made the movie. And she was like, and walked and was like furious. And I was so confused because I'm like, wait, I thought you'd be excited. Like you inspired me to write this thing. But then I realized really quickly that she had never made anything. She had gone out to try to be a screenwriter, wasn't successful, and then came back to be a teacher to teach screenwriting. And so now one of her idiot students had gotten farther than she had. And that was real discouraging, actually, at the time. I was like, man, is this how it's going to be across the board? And the answer is, yeah, pretty much. You have people that are obsessed, or you have people that are frustrated by your success, and you have people that do get excited for your success. And so you eventually weed out those people and figure out who's there to win it and go up with you. But it was a really weird thing to have happen, I thought. And then after that, it was like, okay, I learned the fundamentals, and I'm definitely more of a timeline-based writer. So I'll jot down a ton of ideas, and then I'll break down a timeline. Like, okay, here's a scene, here's a scene, here's a scene, get the whole timeline sequence, and then go back and start laying out the actual script with dialogue. Because I like to focus on the beginning and the end. The last 30 seconds of your movie is the most imperative because that's the last thing the audiences leave with. So you really want to focus. You got to have a really strong ending and a really strong beginning because you got to hook them early and you got to let them leave excited about the movie. And then the middle just connects them. So I would usually always write the ending first and then the beginning and then the middle to be able to make sure that you got the big pack, the big punch at the end, and then the big beginning to get you there. And that was always the hope. Because the movie should be a roller coaster, it should be up and down and all over. And you're just like, by the end of it, you're like, whoo, what a ride, hopefully.
So when you have the little creature inside of you that is knocking with the idea, if you can't figure out the ending, do you just don't begin it? You don't start it?
I mean, there's always, I think average, it takes me about 3 months to write a feature script because the first month will be coming up with ideas. And I'm definitely not one that sits down and just vomits a script out. I know some other writers that are like, oh yeah, I wrote this in 2 days. And I'm like, how'd you do that? That sounds ludicrous. Like, how'd you write 100 pages in 2 days? But a lot of times it's not great either when they do that. But I'll start off with an idea. And usually it's ideas, then you just keep writing down ideas, and eventually you put them in a sequence that makes sense, and you figure out ways to connect the ideas. But you don't always have it right. Like I remember my second feature I directed, Hoodoo For Voodoo, which is a horror comedy we shot in Louisiana. I had a completely different ending. And then I remember, it's really silly, I remember watching Shrek 2, fantastic movie. Watched Shrek 2, and the Shrek 2 ending, suddenly I was like, that's the ending I need. I need this Shrek 2 ending with this big montage, big chase scene, big exciting finale. That's the ending I need. And so I rewrote the ending to be, obviously not the exact, there's no ogres in my movie, but to be very similar to the Shrek 2 ending where it's like this big whole exciting thing. Because I was like, that's what I need. That's a better ending. And now everything is a Shrek 2 ending. I'm just going to end with a song and dance and a chase scene. But every project's different too. There's some projects that take longer, or there's some that take shorter. It just kind of depends on the project. But I usually jot down ideas for a month and break down a timeline and spend, about 6 weeks like laying everything out. Or even shorter. I've written some shorter than that too. Just kind of depends.
With the screenwriting teacher, how did you know that was the reason that she kind of blew you off?
I mean, I can't be 100% sure that's the reason, but it sure seemed like it to me at the time. Because she was really upset that I had made the movie, and I was like shocked. Because I would have thought she'd have been like, that's awesome, and congratulations, that's amazing. But yeah, it really, at least I could see it in her eyes where she was suddenly reevaluating her life and her life choices to be like, how did this 22-year-old kid do this? And I haven't been able to do this. Now, granted, that movie didn't make a lot of money. It didn't cost any money. It's pretty terrible. I wouldn't recommend watching it nowadays because it'd be like, oh God, what is this? But at the time, there was a lot of content coming out of that caliber, low budget horror that came out every week, at the video stores, and no actors or anything, just a bunch of random stuff. So it was successful at the time. Nowadays, you wouldn't be able to have success with it, I don't think. Not real success, but.
And it was based on a proverb, you said, or?
That movie was called The Night Owl, and I based it on the book of Lilith, which is, in the beginning, God created Adam and Lilith, and they were equal. And this book of the Bible was deleted because the men at the time did not like the idea of a woman being equivalent to a man. And so Lilith ends up leaving the Garden of Eden, and God makes Eve out of his rib to make her less than him. Because the ruling, of course, at the time, biblical times, the men didn't want women to have any kind of power or idea of power. And so this is one of the deleted books of the Bible that now with the Dead Sea Scrolls and things, they've found multiple ones. And so I built this whole story where the revelations is actually caused by Lilith on a very small scale. Instead of coming in with a giant trumpet of angels, it's like a back door, and it starts with a few certain elements that the Bible kind of alludes to kickstart the revelations. And so I made this, then I was like, oh, 4 girls go to a cabin for spring break. And then the revelations happen, and it's wonderful. That's basically how it kind of comes together.
But it's not a faith-based horror film, but it's loosely based on.
It's based on the ideas of that
okay.
And I mean, there's a lot of evidence of that throughout history of those books and Lilith and everything. It's interesting because a lot of times in culture they use Lilith as the first vampire, and there's dozens of vampire movies with a Lilith vampire character because supposedly this is the spawn of demons. Demons started being spawned from Lilith, and humans started being spawned from Adam, and that there's demons all over the Bible and everything. That's where all these things come from, I guess. Some of these deleted books, but I always thought it was really interesting to see like the historical connections with biblical context. Especially I was raised Catholic, but went to a Christian school. So I got both sides of that spectrum. But yeah, I mean, real history. I love putting real elements, like connecting reality elements to fantastical things in movies. Because you get that little bit of groundedness, but then everything's fantastical around it. I think it's cool.
We had this comment come in on our channel. In a horror movie, only the villain character matters. All the other characters are expendable. Most are going to die anyway. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I disagree, I would say, with that. I think in a movie, every character matters. You want to build good characters across the board. If you can build a good villain character, that's fantastic. Because a throwaway villain character is not good for your story. Just a straight villain. You want that villain to have motives. You want that villain to have some kind of connective element. Those always make the best villains. But you want a lead character to root for. And in a horror movie, it's somewhat of a Russian roulette. You don't know, hopefully you don't know who's going to get killed. I mean, there's definitely a lot of cliches in horror films, a lot of 80s cliches, which I always think is interesting. That even nowadays, like people still use 80s cliches instead of 90s or 2000 cliches, if that even exists. 2000s was more about the torture porn element of horror with just brutal violence and graphic gore and whatnot. But I mean, every movie needs good characters. Totally. Even horror movies. I mean, every movie. So you want to connect with someone. If you connect the most with the villain, that's fine. You're connecting with someone. And maybe you think the villain's right. A lot of people watch the Avengers and like, oh, Thanos had a good point. It's like, you want your villains to be dynamic. And so if you can make a horror villain that's dynamic, that's really impressive. Especially one that's, like a Jason Voorhees, who was done wrong. He lost his life due to someone else's incompetence. He yearns for his mother who killed in his name. Like he has all these different reasons why he's doing things. It's not like he just shows up and starts slashing people for no reason. Michael Myers was one where he had good reasons for a while, but now it's kind of just like a hack and slash kind of a thing. But when you can make your villains dynamic is awesome. So I don't necessarily think that every character is a throwaway character. There's definitely some low budget movies that don't pay as much attention to that and just think, oh, if I follow this simple formula, then it'll be good because it's a horror movie, people die, there's blood, you're happy. And it's like, well, not always. And that's why there's 1,000 of those that don't go anywhere or don't reach cult status because they're not good. But I mean, every movie needs good, solid characters all across the board.
What are some of those classic 80s horror cliches? Not 90s or 2000s, but the 80s.
Sure.
What do we see across the board?
The 80s definitely brought us where it's like you have your very distinct characters. Here's your jock guy. Here's your sexy girl. Here's your nerdy guy. Here's this person has some kind of your stoner character or someone that does drugs. Which is really funny because I really want to do a slasher movie with modern tropes where it's like, oh, here's your yoga instructor, here's your vlogger, here's
Airbnb host.
Your Airbnb host, yeah, here's your Minecraft beta tester or something. But you have those consistent characters, whereas nowadays while people still sort of fit those types, in reality, it's so much more across the board. There's not just a football player. You might have a football player that loves playing Dungeons and Dragons. You might have a nerdy guy who just made $1 million with his crypto. I mean, there's so many different avenues nowadays that it's kind of interesting that people really focused on those types of tropes. And like they made a movie like Scream, which ironically Scream, that came out in 1996 from Wes Craven, that was the movie that made me go into filmmaking. Because it talks about all these tropes and it pulls back the curtain on the thought process that goes into movie making. And I had never really thought about it until then. That really opened my eyes to be like, oh, there is a lot more to movies than just stuff happening. Like all these decisions are made really specifically. And so with 80s tropes, it's like, oh no, this is going to happen and that caused you to die. A big thing was the AIDS epidemic. So in Halloween and Friday the 13th, they're like, oh, if you have sex, you get killed. Because at the time, people were dying from AIDS. Sure. And that was a really big fear in the country. And so they took advantage of that to be like, look, this is scary. Nowadays it'd be like, oh no, this one's going to lose his 401k. It's like, oh, that like terrify you, Oh, Social Security's not going to be here anymore, or you lost all your Bitcoin. You lost your Bitcoin drive, or something like that.
What about 90s tropes? What about 90s horror?
90s ended up reimagining the 80s tropes and making all of the characters very intelligent. Scream kind of kick-started that genre of filmmaking. Usually every decade in horror, there's a movie that kind of kick-starts and reinvigorates the franchises. In the 90s, Scream did that. And so then all of a sudden you had new slasher movies like I Know You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, where they're like, there's a killer, but all of our kids are totally smart. They're on computers, they have cell phones, like they're totally hip with the world around them. They make references to pop culture. These kids are smarter now than they were back then, where they're just like, hey, let's go smoke up behind the barn. Oh no, he's got a machete. That's kind of how the 80s were. Where in the 90s, everyone's smarter, so they're all running better because they're more aware, self-aware. And then in the 2000s, you get into the Saw movies and Hostel, where it's just about brutalizing people and just graphic torture, which I was never really into because I'm like, it's boring. That's boring. That's not smart. It's just kind of, oh no, this person's stuck in a trap. And it's like, all right. Nowadays, I don't even know. Oh, Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch Project was a huge boost too in found footage horror, because people were kind of like, oh man, they made Blair Witch Project for $60,000 and they sold it for $1 million. I can make $1 million if I run around with a camera in the woods. And so then all of a sudden you get 1,000 of those kind of movies, and a lot of them are not done well. I mean, that's a total needle in a haystack movie. Nobody could have bet that that movie would make so much money and be as impactful as it was. And it is scary, like, because they pitched it as being real. And I remember driving 2.5 hours, 3 days in a row to the nearest theater playing it in 1999. I took friends the next 2 days. So I'm like, you have to watch this movie. It's incredible. It's going to blow your mind. And you watch it nowadays, and I still think it's impactful. Like, I still get, jump in it and get nervous and anxiety, because it's just such a real, visceral experience. And then the rise in reality of television after that. I mean, you suddenly get Survivor and all these other reality shows, and that's a huge boom market, because the studios first off are like, oh, this is really cheap. We don't have to put anything in visual effects. We don't have to pay all these people. Like, there's people running around with a camera. This is fantastic. We'll make a ton of money. And they do. And that's why we have like 100 reality shows now. But horror constantly reinvents itself, because eventually themes outstay their welcome and someone figures out a new way to tell a new story. And the great thing about horror is that the entire world can relate to it. Every single person dies. Every single one of us on the planet. So everyone on Earth can relate to trying to stay alive, because we all have to. You look at like an American comedy. Like, I remember when American Pie came out and they were like, oh, they sold this movie overseas for nothing. It's like, well, yeah, because there's probably a lot of communities in Africa that aren't worried about getting some in high school. Like, they can't relate to that. Doesn't connect as well. But horror, sci-fi, action, sci-fi, every single one of us has stars over our head. It connects us all. And action, like, everyone wants that big, explosions and escapes and everything. So there are a lot more connectivity to those types of movies than there are for dramas or comedies and things like that.
How do you think some of the Stephen King films have evolved over the decades? Because a lot of them had this broader message. They weren't just scares and different, some of them were gory, obviously, but there was usually a broader message.
Yeah. Stephen King's a fantastic writer. I mean, his books are so visceral and so deep and so thick. My wife's a huge fan of Stephen King's. We have a ton of his books. And the movies of Stephen King started really, really strong. You have movies like Carrie and The Shining. I love Christine, personally. There's a bunch of those movies that came out. Pet Sematary, I really enjoyed. And then eventually they started turning them into television. And I think that's when it started getting watered down. We're like, we can make a 6-hour miniseries based on the Stephen King book, but it has to be rated PG. And so then it's kind of like, other than It, the original It, which was still very impactful, the other ones start getting a little more watered down, and they're not, it's all made for television, so you can't really keep all the themes with it. And it's like, oh, here's the Tommyknockers and the Langoliers, and all of a sudden you're like, Rose Red, and you kind of lose that after a while. And nowadays they started, like, they brought It back and they remade It, which I really, really enjoyed, because they made it more of a fun movie. It's still scary, but it's a lot of fun to watch. They made his movie Cell, which didn't do very well. I mean, a lot of his stories are very hit or miss with film. A lot of them are internal, a lot of internal things happening in the characters' heads, and it's really difficult to translate that into a movie. I think the last one was Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. And I thought they did a really, really good job in it, but it's not ever going to be that original movie, especially at the time period when that came out. It was much more of an impact than if you had brought it out today, I think.
What was the one where it was about a tabloid journalist?
The Dark Half.
Okay, where he flies, and then he finds...
Oh, the Night Flyer.
Yeah, the Night Flyer.
Yeah, he's a vampire.
Right, but then I don't want to give it away, but then there's like this other ominous pilot, and that the two worlds collide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's the Night Flyer.
Okay.
He has this little Cessna that he goes around and they keep finding.
And he's bitter, and he's in these bars, and he's just writing this horrible tabloid stuff, but he stumbles upon a crime, and okay.
And there's a lot of them. I mean, The Mist is really well done. There's a lot of them that are well done. There's a lot of them that are, like, they just remade Pet Sematary, which I like the original one better. The new It I really enjoyed, though. I did enjoy that a lot. And there's just so many. Gerald's Game was good. Netflix did that one. That was new and good. But I feel like it's kind of hit or miss with his stuff because the books are so involved and so mental that it's hard to kind of portray that as easily.
Why is evil important in storytelling?
I think evil is important in storytelling because it's a real thing. I think a lot of people try to hide that there isn't evil in the world. And I think that's a disservice because you want to explain both sides of every story to try to give the best thought process for it you can, especially as a father now that we have a son, he's 11, and we're homeschooling him. And so you kind of get to pick and choose how you explain things to him, how you decide. Like critical race theory is a big argument right now. And we definitely try to explain both sides of every story. It's like, this is what really happened. This is the truth. We're not going to candy coat it. We're not going to make up some fairy tale. And evil is real. And so you want people to know that, such people that you're educating. And so I feel like in movies, it's important too because you want to root for someone. A lot of people like happy endings. I mean, I like happy endings personally. My wife likes tragedies, but that's her. But you kind of want to have this battle of good and evil has been the tale as old as time, back to the very beginning of existence. It's always good versus evil. I mean, the Bible is all good versus evil. And so, I mean, you have the famous quote from Spaceballs, evil will always triumph because good is dumb, which I always think about. Obviously not the case, but everybody wants to be on the winning team. There's a thing that's really popular. I think it's called sports. I'm not involved, so I'm not aware of it. But people love being on a winning team. Whether you follow a football team, or you go to a church that you like, or you have a club that you're into, you always want to be on something positive, right? With like-minded people. And sports is a huge, huge element of that. There's always a winner and a loser. And in life, everyone kind of loses because we all, come and live and die. Right. There's an end game for everyone, essentially.
Sure. Death and taxes.
Death and taxes, exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's the running joke in our house for adulthood. We keep telling our son, it's like, oh, you're 11, you're going to be doing taxes soon. It's like, oh no. Like that's the thing he's the most terrified of is taxes. We keep telling him.
He should be.
But I think evil is important because without evil, then there's nothing to overcome. There's no good guy saving the day. There's no hero if there's nothing to beat. It's just a person sitting around looking for something to do, I guess. But, I mean, that's been in existence of storytelling forever. I would be wondering if you did a movie with no antagonist, and it would just be a person existing, that wouldn't be a very exciting movie because nothing would really happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be evil, but there's usually always an antagonist of some kind. It might be taxes. It could be the IRS. But if it wasn't, then it would just be a person sitting around. I always love when people tell you like, oh, you got to do a reality show on me. Like my life is so exciting, so crazy. Like you wouldn't believe it how crazy my life is. And it'd be like, okay, like, so if I showed up at your house tomorrow for 2 hours with a camera, what would happen? They'd be like, well, I mean, I'd be cleaning the bathroom and I got to drop my kids off at school. I'm like, yeah, it's not very exciting. Like there's no story there. Like you would have to create a story. And the only way to create a story is to create some kind of genre or drama, create some kind of drama with some kind of inciting incident, with some kind of conflict. And with a conflict, there's something to overcome. It doesn't have to be evil necessarily, but evil takes a different term too. I mean, I think taxes are evil to an extent, though I appreciate everything they bring us.
Well, sure, yeah, they're it's a necessary evil,
necessary
because
evil.
they pay for different services that we rely on.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely a lot of evil in our world and in our country and in our neighborhoods. And I mean, you can watch the nightly news and see how horrific things are. And so that is something that also unifies us. People are scared of evil things. And when you can overcome that, or have a hero that overcomes the evil and saves the day and gives you that happy ending. I mean, a lot of people ideally want a happy ending. Everyone wants to live happily ever after. So I like giving people something that they can enjoy like that. You wanna have that happy ending, I think.
Sure. So a movie about somebody meditating on a bench where nothing bad happens to them is incredibly boring. But if we peppered in various things, maybe someone asking them to move over because they need to sit down on their lunch hour to use their cell phone, to call their bookie, and
Yep.
they're screaming because they just lost a bunch of money on a game,
Yep.
and this person's trying to become spiritual and detach.
Well, in a movie without an antagonist is an instructional. You can watch a workout video, and a workout video, the villain is fat, I guess. And that could be your story. Is it, well, I'm going to watch this workout video for half an hour, and I'm going to kill that fat. I'm going to burn that fat so bad. And even then, but I mean, you can watch a yoga instructional video, and it's a person doing yoga for half an hour. There's no villain. There's nothing. You're trying to overcome your ability to feel good or some stress you have on your person or everything. And that's an example. But I think if you told someone, hey, we're going to sit down and watch a half an hour yoga video tonight after work, what do you think? They're going to be like, what are you talking about? That's weird. You weirdo. Like, why would I watch that? After you go home, have some dinner, grab a beer and watch a half an hour yoga video? That's strange. So I think that's why that type of stuff is included.
Who are your favorite villains and why?
I really like complex villains that a lot of times you have villains that are selfish or they just want something. They want more money. They want more land. They want to stomp on whoever they possibly can to get what they want. Those villains usually aren't nearly as compelling. I like villains that have more ideals or want something for a very specific reason. And a lot of times their reasons are good and make sense to us. That's really good writing. Like, you want someone to be able to humanize your villain to an extent, because then it's like, then your hero gets a little bit more complicated. I'm trying to think of a specific example now. That's a good one. I mean, of course, I like villains that are charismatic. Like a Freddy Krueger, I think, is a fun villain. In our house, we're a house divided. My wife's into Jason and I'm into Freddy. And so I always like the fact that that villain is a caricature, essentially, of a nightmare. But I'm not a fan of big government. I don't like that. Like, that's definitely a big villain for me across the board. Growing up in a political family, like, my father was a lawyer and a judge, and I've had more politics than I would ever care to deal with, ever, run through my life. So I'm not a fan of that at all. And to me, movies are escapism. I don't like dramas. I don't like art house films. I can't get into stuff that wins the Academy Award most of the time, because I'm just like, I don't want to relive someone else's pain like that, at least in a realistic way. In a slasher movie, if somebody gets their head chopped off with a battle axe, I mean, it's a little bit different. That's a little more cartoonish. But, someone losing their house to a mortgage or a divorce and having their whole life get upended and they're miserable. And I'm like, I don't want to watch that. Like, I don't want to experience that. I want escapism. I want something that's colorful and crazy. And so I don't have to worry about the real evils of the world that exist. I don't want to have to worry about my kid getting snatched or, someone robbing our house. And oh my gosh, we just had to get a mailbox because people kept stealing packages off our porch. And it's just like, and then you get one of the Ring cameras, but then the Ring camera doesn't see in the dark. So you didn't pick up the people that come in the dark, and it's a whole thing.
And now you're in a database.
And now I'm in a database, yeah. Exactly.
Because you walked in front of your own camera.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I think the real villains are in reality much more than they are in movies. And I like villains that are more cartoonish, because the idea of a true evil and a real evil in reality is not one that I enjoy. So I think that I like more of the cartoonish villains and the big the Dr. Evils of the world. Sure. I appreciate more so than what could be like a real actual villain.
What has to happen in the first 10 minutes of a horror screenplay?
Back in the day, they used to say, when they would pick up a horror movie, distributors, that you had to have a kill in the first 5 minutes of your horror movie. That was a requirement. So most of the time, because you want something to hook the audience, you want to get them in being like, this is what this movie's going to be about. A movie like Scream does that really, really well by having this whole like nice, happy scene and then killing the biggest actor in the movie, which was from Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. You have a whole opening sequence with this high-end actress, and then they kill her. And then the movie starts, and it's like, that's a little more than 5 minutes, but in Scream it was 5 minutes. You need something big, a big inciting incident like that to hook the audience in and be like, oh, okay, this is the ride we're in for. And I think that's important. I mean, that's important with every movie. You have to have something to hook them at the beginning to be able to bring them in. And if you start off with a very slow sequence in the beginning and your audience starts to nod off 20 minutes in, that's a problem. You don't want that to happen. So usually try to start with a bang and end with a bigger bang, I think.
Yeah, I know with Children of the Corn, that was pretty gruesome. That was actually too gruesome for me. But with Carrie, I don't remember within the first 5-10 minutes. It was kind of a slow build, wasn't it?
It is a slow build.
But it was still very effective.
Carrie's much more of like a giallo type style, like an Italian style of a slow, lots of reds, lots of deep colors, which is a big fan base for sure. And there's definitely different types of genres of horror, I think, that you kind of can look at. I mean, there's slasher as a genre and giallo as a genre. There's comedy horror, there's action horror. It's really interesting about the comedy horror is you look back again to the Great Depression, and comedy horror came in then when they started introducing Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, because the world was on fire and everyone was depressed. So they're like, okay, we got to bring movies back in that can raise spirits to kind of get people's minds off of this. And they started introducing those comedy movies with the fans of the monsters at the time. And so that kind of helped. And that's happened too. That happened in the 80s as well with the horror, where it started off strong slashers. And then by the end of the 80s, Freddy Krueger is a joke and he's making one-liners and the movies are funny. And they have like movies like Student Bodies, which is a spoof of slasher movies. And then Scream ends up coming out in the 90s, which is basically a spoof of slasher movies as it is, just told a little bit more seriously. And then that got its own spoof in Scary Movie, which they made 5 of. So it kind of goes in hand, horror and comedy. But you want that roller coaster, you want to have the tension of running for your life. And then the humor where it's like, oh, we survived. We're okay. He made a joke. Okay, now I feel better and I'm good. And then it's like, oh, then it's back up and then it's back down. So that's the overall hope, I guess.
Right. What about in Japan? They had a 10-year depression. What kind of movies? Forgive me.
I actually have no idea.
Yeah, okay.
About
I'm
that.
just curious if it followed a similar
and their movies are very spiritual. Everything is a lot of spirit-based, demon-based. Japanese horror is very specific, which is cool. It's very in tuned. We went to Japan for our 10th anniversary, and one of the things we did was we went to this incredible theme park called Fuji-Q, which is the base of Mount Fuji, and in it is the world's biggest haunted house. It is 4 stories tall. It's a hospital. It's a massive, fully sized hospital. And you walk in and they tell you all your instructions in Japanese. I have no idea what they were saying. And then they're like, okay, goodbye. And they slam the door. And they told us it lasts 45 minutes. And I was like, how on earth does it take 45 minutes to walk through a haunted house? And so you go in, and it's literally an abandoned hospital. And you go to a hallway, and there's a room full of doors. And every door is slightly cracked open. There's like 30 doors in front of you. And the lights are flickering. But you find out really quickly something I'd never seen before in a haunted house. And this is definitely the best haunted house experience I've ever had. It's soundproofed. So when you get into the hallway, all you hear is your heart beating. You hear nothing. It's like a vacuum. And you're like, because you usually hear that like blast music and they blast sounds and everything. And you're in a line with 100 people. Nothing. And so all of a sudden they're like, okay, go ahead. And you have to get out of this hospital. And so you start walking down this long 50-foot hallway, or longer than that, probably 100-foot hallway, really. And you walk down it, and you're peeking into each door, and you're like, all right. And my wife's like, close. And it's just you and your party. So it's just my wife and I walking through this entire thing. And you walk around, you go through the entire first level, and nothing happens. But the whole time you're waiting for somebody to jump out of a door at you, nothing happens. Then you go to the next level, And it's the same giant hallway. And you start walking by, then all of a sudden you hear a noise behind you. And you turn around and you see a guy just standing in the middle of the hallway staring at you, like zombified, just staring. And it's just you two in this big empty hallway and this dude. And then all of a sudden he starts screaming at the top of his lungs. And he runs at you at full sprint. And so, of course, my wife is gone. Like, she's taken off, and I'm still looking to see what's going on. And so you start running down this hallway, and he is right on your heels. He's just screaming at you. And you get to the end of the hallway, and you turn around, and he's gone. And then you're like, we have 30 more minutes in this building. And you go through all these other little things. And it was crazy, but I was like, wow, what an experience. It was so nuts. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. Not in American haunted houses. So that was pretty neat.
Wow. That sounds fun.
And you can build a lot of creepiness in your own mind by yourself with nothing around you. So we're kind of subconsciously, we're accustomed to how fear works. It's like, okay, someone's going to jump out of that door. Or, oh, this light's going to flicker. This thing's going to happen. That's probably what's going to be. You know, people try to walk through these haunted houses and call out everything. You go to like a Halloween Horror Nights or something and like, well, that guy's going to be over there. And then he is. And it's like, oh. But that was a really interesting experience for sure.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that. And it's about suspense, it sounds like, more than anything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're, of course, you only have one way to go, so you're not really making too many decisions while you're stuck in this haunted house. But you literally, all you hear is your heart beating, because it's like a vacuum. And so you're just like, and you've been running around. And so then you got to go upstairs, and they had certain things that would like run mechanics. So you'd walk by something, and it would just go boom and just slam right next to you. And there's nothing there other than like a little mechanical thing. And it'd be like, oh my gosh. It was awesome.
That
was
sounds
really cool.
fun. I like that. Should something scary happen on page 1 of a horror screenplay? Or is it better to just stretch it out a little farther?
I don't think it necessarily should happen on page 1. I think tension's really important. And I think building, in horror especially, you build your location and you build your characters and you build your tension. I remember there's a great story about I'm pretty sure it's the first Alien. I can't remember if it's Alien or Aliens now. But there's a whole scene of the spaceship waking up at the beginning of the movie. It's just the empty hallways and the lights turning on of the spaceship, like introducing this dramatic arena that we're getting ready to experience. And I always thought that was really important, to where it's like you build, you want your stories to build and build and build. And so as far as something scary happening in the very first page, it would have to be like an immediate slam or something. And I think movies will use gimmicks like that, where it's just like, boom, there's a loud noise because it's going to startle you because you're in a theater with bass and surround sound. And you're just like, ugh, because it's there. But I don't necessarily think it should be on the first page. But by page 5, you kind of want your audience to know what they're in for, to give them a little piece of how to expect what's going on. Because I like ramping things. I like starting off and going up and up and up, and you have little divots and you go up and up and up and then end. So I think that's important too. I also think people are scared by different things. Like if you have someone cutting someone's throat in the opening shot, someone might be scared by that. I wouldn't be scared by it. It's like, oh, well, that sucks for that person. Or it's just gross, or it's gory, but it's not really scary. I feel like the ultimate fear is when you feel your heart start to pound over the tension and the music and the moments and everything's building up and you know something's going to happen and you're baiting the audience to get to a certain point to then you can, slam it in or distract them. And then they're kind of like, oh, that's like, oh, and then it comes out like 2 seconds later and startles them because they're not fully prepared. But every movie's different too. I think it kind of depends on what exactly the script calls for and the vibe the movie has and kind of what direction you want it to go in.
Why is Michael Bay a controversial filmmaker? Or is he not? Is that a fallacy?
I think Michael Bay becomes controversial. Well, today, I think there's multiple reasons. I think Michael Bay personifies a character that likes hot cars and hot women and a lifestyle that is slowly becoming more and more uncouth in today's modern audience. And so I feel like that was a very consistent MTV generation type of program.
Miami Vice.
Miami Vice. And he lives in South Beach in Miami. So I feel like that's one element of it. I think that a lot of filmmakers have this idea that they are artists, and artists are not allowed to have money, and artists are not allowed to be successful. Whereas there's this whole idea of selling out. People are like, oh, they're selling out. It's like, well, how are they selling out? Well, now they're making all this money. And I'm like, as an artist, if I could make my art, get it to more people, and be incredibly financially successful, I would 100% want to do that. Like, I don't believe in the whole element of selling out. You have a job. You know, these things are jobs. Even as a director, you still have a job. You have a boss. You're going to have a boss no matter what. It's the studio. It's an executive producer. It's a financier. And you have to do what that boss wants, or you're going to get fired. Now, they hire you for your creativity and to bring what you have to the table, but it's still a job. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. So you have a filmmaker like Michael Bay, who's one of the most successful financial filmmakers of all time. I mean, his movies made billions of dollars. And you may like his movie or you may not like his movie. I mean, he's made movies that I don't like. He's made a lot of movies that I do like. But the fact that he's a commercial filmmaker shouldn't be a negative to him. Like, why? Why would someone not like that? A person can make movies and make a lot of money and make a lot of people happy. I mean, there's fans of his all over the world. So it's always kind of confusing to me where, well, this filmmaker's not a true artist because he makes too much money, or his movie scripts aren't as good. And it's like, okay, well, you can have that argument. You know, those movies aren't for you. But you can go over and watch a Richard Linklater movie and probably enjoy that a lot more, which is totally fine. Like, they're allowed to coexist, because if movies didn't make money, there would be no movie business. You wouldn't be able to make anything. And it's not like Sundance winners are making billions of dollars at the box office. I mean, they make those movies to win awards. They don't make them to make a lot of money. And that's okay. That's totally fine. There's a balance between that. Studios are like, these are our money makers, and they finance the award winners, and then everybody gets everything. And that's a pretty simple concept to me. So I don't understand why so many people have such a problem with it or lambast Michael Bay because of that. Now, granted, not every movie he makes is amazing. I mean, I don't think any filmmaker has made every single movie. I mean, even Spielberg has had movies that did not do well or were not received well. So, I mean, I don't think you can really completely count out a filmmaker because of that.
You know, it seems like in every industry, you know, writing, art, music, there's always one or two that get branded as a sellout, or like, let's take Nickelback. I don't see anything wrong with their songs. I mean, but there was, for a while, they were just attacked, or Bridges of Madison County, or Banksy, or there's just different people that they get this label that, oh, well, this is not true, whatever.
Right.
And it's really interesting how then the mob, the hive, swarms over there and attacks and says, okay, this is a sellout. This is what a sellout. But is it really? If people are voting with their dollars and they're voting for their dollars of Michael Bay movies, what's wrong with that? You just don't go see them.
Right. And I mean, they would fail miserably if no one went to see them. And granted, now he's doing a lot more streaming films because those studios are offering him the same amount of money to make streaming films. You know, he just did a Netflix film and an Amazon film. And so that's fine. Like, and those audiences will enjoy it, and his audiences that don't watch his movies won't. And it's fine, totally fine. It's the whole sellout thing is weird to me because I don't understand why being financially successful makes you any less of an artist. I get that the idea like, well, you come in and the studio's like, well, you got to do all these things or we're not going to hire you. And you're like, okay, I'll do those things. Oh, well, you're a sellout. It's like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm doing a job. It's all a job. You still have a boss that pays you to do a job. And if you do a bad job, they don't hire you back. They hire somebody else. Because there's a million other reviews out there that are willing to do the job. So it's kind of confusing, the fact that the art versus business, you know, it's a show business, not just a show. And so I think that these studios have it built where it's like they can make enough money to do the smaller pictures that will make awards and play Sundance and things like that. But there's a balance across the board. And that's okay. Like, as long as people understand that's all right, like, you're allowed to make whatever you want. It might not make Michael Bay money, and you might not never make a movie again, but that's okay. Like, everyone's allowed to like whatever they want. That's all allowed, I think.
And the audience is the boss in a lot of ways too. So you think that Michael Bay's movies, you say, might represent something in this current age where it's too much of sort of the 80s, 90s beautiful lifestyle that maybe now we're rebelling against? I'm putting words in your mouth here, but.
I mean, things are definitely across the board being more scrutinized, and as they should. I mean, like, I'm 100% on board with Me Too. I'm 100% board with all of these movements to make the industry cleaner and better and more inclusive. I'm totally on board with that, absolutely. And so I feel like some of those elements that have carried over that used to be consistent are changing and probably should change. You know, we talk about horror movies and we have 80s cliches. I don't think every movie should be an 80s cliche. I think that that's silly and lazy at some point. You know, we have modern times, we have modern cliches we can easily utilize. So it doesn't have to be about that. But I think he has a very specific brand that he produces and creates. And if that brand is incredibly successful, they're going to keep making that brand. But you have filmmakers like Lars von Trier, who has a very specific brand as well. And that brand's not for me. I mean, his movies are way more exploitive than anything Michael Bay has ever done. But he's an artist. He's not, because he's not making billions of dollars. And that's a very interesting discussion as far as people that are like, well, Michael Bay's not an artist, but Lars von Trier's an artist. And it's like, but he's more exploitive and he's less exploitive, but he's making more money. My bottom line is, you're allowed to like whatever you want, and I don't care. It doesn't affect me at all. And I'm not going to go be like, oh, well, you liked Hereditary, so I'm not going to talk to you again. Like, your voice doesn't count because you liked this movie I didn't like. It's like, I don't care. You're allowed to like whatever you want.
Sure.
And you hope more people would think that.
And some people like to look at pretty people in fast cars and want to envision themselves in that lifestyle.
Yeah. And it's a very consistent brand that's been done for decades. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know if people are aware, but there's a lot of movie stars that are attractive.
Sure.
I mean, that's not a new thing. And not saying every movie has to have all perfect movie stars in it. And they don't. Most of them don't. But I don't know. It's a constant discussion of what's the line. And especially nowadays with the internet and social media, and back in the day it was like, oh, you look at this magazine cover, like, we shouldn't put attractive people on magazine covers because it makes people feel bad. And now it's like, oh, we're on Instagram and this influencer who's half dressed has 5 million followers, and so I need to do that. If I want to be famous, I have to do this and get an OnlyFans or get a Patreon and do all these things. And like, that's what the kids nowadays are dealing with. It's like, you're stuck in this giant mass of 1 billion people all vying for attention at the same time through the internet in any way they possibly can. And I have friends that make hundreds of thousands of dollars on OnlyFans. And that's great. Like, if you can do that and you're satisfied and it's making your living, that's awesome. Like, good for you. I don't care. Again, I am not the police of anyone else's happiness. If you do something that makes you happy, as long as it's legal, that's fine. Like, that's great. Because I wouldn't want you coming to my house and being like, oh, you like to play video games? Well, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't do that. You can't do that. You shouldn't play video games. It's like, why? Why can't I play video games? What does this affect you? It doesn't affect you at all. And so it's always a confusing argument to me because, yeah, no one should be the sheriff of someone else's happiness.
Sure. Do you remember the TV show Solid Gold from the 80s? Oh, okay. So it was just like a music. It was almost like with Dick Clark but it was with very risque dancers and Andy Gibb, and they would introduce, it was almost like a Casey Kasem top 10, but they had the dancers come out.
It's like the Soul Train.
Right, sort of, and yeah, it was quite, these were like Vegas showgirl style dancers with, and then you would have, Quarter Flash or whatever the 80s band was that was there.
Right.
But, I mean, there's a reason people like to look at certain things, and yeah, it's just interesting.
I mean, Baywatch was on the air for how many years?
Sure.
Quite a few.
Right.
And I mean, the industry's always kind of been about that. You get some very charismatic people, And I mean, there are very charismatic people that are not necessarily what people would call, incredibly attractive, I guess. But
Sure.
we have fantastic comedians and actors all across the spectrum now of things, literally across the spectrum. And that's fantastic. I mean, the more inclusion, the better. I totally agree with. Everyone should get the ability to find their own happiness.
Well, and what constitutes eye candy is very, I mean, there's just very different
Totally.
levels.
Totally.
So, but I guess that's a negative term now, so we can't use that.
I didn't say it.
Okay, I did. I know.
I don't want to get canceled.
No, sorry. I said eye candy. Do you have arguments with any of your friends about Michael Bay movies?
This Michael Bay is going to haunt me forever. I don't think I have arguments with friends over Michael Bay. And it's not like I don't have like a shrine to Michael Bay in my house. It's a very small shrine.
Okay.
But
you put an offering every day for him?
When I would try to get into film school, it was a problem that I wanted to be a commercial director, to make movies that made money. I knew that horror movies and action movies made money, and I wanted to make movies that first off could appeal to a global audience and make as much money as possible, because you learn very quickly, if you make money in movies, you get to keep making movies.
Sure.
So by not getting into film school, it was basically like, well, you're not the kind of filmmaker that we want. We don't want any more filmmakers like you. You're wrong. And it's like, I don't really think I'm wrong. I think I'm just different. And I think it's confusing that nobody wants to make money in a business that you make money with. So the Michael Bay argument, and I'll speak my piece about Michael Bay, where I'm like, I don't understand someone not wanting to make money in movies. Sure. If you don't want to make money in movies, that's very easy, and your job's going to be really easy because it's really hard to make money in movies. So you're going to have a great time. But I get into it at film festivals more so, like or around. There's people that I call filmies. I've always called filmies since college, that are like, well, I only go to these types of theaters and I only watch these types of movies. And if the movie cost over $30 million, I won't watch it because I can't support that kind of blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, I don't care. Like, you can watch whatever you want. It doesn't affect me, like, at all. But it's strange when people don't, like, they have this argument that he should not be included as a storyteller or as a filmmaker, when some of the stuff he's done, I mean, his action things and the stunts and what he's pulled off are absolutely incredible. And he's got some of the best stunt teams in the world, and he's really well involved with the military and gets access to all of this stuff that nobody else gets access to because he respects those elements. Scripts, he's not as worried about because there's just plenty of explosions, so you're happy with the explosions. He's made some movies that I love, and he's made some that I don't. So, I mean, it's not like I argue about it that much, but I'm always confused because if I could be Michael Bay and make whatever I want at a massive budgetary scale, that'd be amazing. Like, I would love to do that. Because who doesn't want unlimited power and control over their story? So he's earned that by doing what he does, and he's got a very specific brand, and I appreciate that. And there's lots of directors that have that same ability. Tim Burton has a very distinct brand. J.J. Abrams has a very distinct brand. Like, they are getting well known for what they do. Kevin Smith. And a lot of very successful directors do what they do best, and that makes a lot of money for them. And I don't think just because someone's making more money or making the things you don't like or you don't respect, that they shouldn't have a seat at the table at all. I think that's ridiculous.
What would you tell someone who says it's impossible to shoot a feature film in 5 days?
I would say that's not entirely accurate. A feature film runs 90 minutes. So you could put a camera on your cat on the table for 90 minutes, boom, you got yourself a feature film. That's all it took, 90 minutes. So technically that is true, that you can make a feature film in under 5 days.
Now, with your film, your documentary, how many days of shooting?
The total shooting days of ours was 7 days. We shot a 4-day event. So we had camera teams running around for 4 days, and then we did 3 days of interviews. About 16 hours of interviews.
And were these spontaneous interviews, or did you let the people know ahead of time that you would be meeting with them?
No, they were not spontaneous. They were set up interviews. We actually did, for our documentary, we did everyone's interviews before the convention happened, except for the one main owner. And so then we shot the 4 days of the convention, and then we did his interview after to help recap some of the crazy events that had happened.
And was any of this scripted? Did you have a 3-act structure for your documentary?
Not at all. It was definitely trial by fire, I think. But I got called in by the owners of the convention. We were old friends, and they called me down to help, try to do this documentary on what they thought would be their last major Supercon event. And so I knew kind of how I wanted to do it. I wanted to play off them showing a behind the scenes only focus on the documentary, because they already had a couple Comic-Con documentaries that showed it from the fans' perspective or from a different angle, but no one's ever really shown it just from behind the scenes. And so we knew we only had to shoot for 4 days because it was only a 4-day event, but we ran around for 18 to 20 hours a day with a different camera team attached to each person that was running the show. And so, yeah, I mean, that was 7 days, which we could have done it in less, but we did a second round of interviews that we added another day for some extraneous interviews.
And how did you deal with crowd control and their reaction to the camera?
Well, luckily at conventions, when you enter the premises, there's giant signs saying that we have the ability to videotape and photograph you here for multiple purposes. So they didn't really have any say in that. And the building knew we were doing a documentary. The police department knew we were doing a documentary. Some of the celebrities, I think, knew. And so it wasn't a secret to anyone. And so we didn't really have any issues with that. And then everything we covered was truth. I mean, the entire movie is a fly-on-the-wall experience. We didn't set up anything. We didn't organize any scenes. We literally just ran around and followed the action and then cut out all the boring parts because there's a lot of action that happens. So it was pretty easy to build a story off of.
How did you know there was going to be enough story to make a film?
I guess starting out, you never really know how big your story is going to be or what's going to be more of the focus. I had a general idea that whatever we didn't need of show footage, we have interviews to help out. So I had a good idea that we would have 90 minutes worth of content. I didn't know exactly how exciting it would be or what would happen until the actual show started happening. And then each day when we would find a new storyline, we would jot down notes. My main camera operator, Chris McDaniel, had DP'd a bunch of reality shows. So he had some good notes for us on, okay, if you catch something but you don't catch it verbally, just ask them to repeat what just happened. Grab a shot of this, grab a shot of that. And so between the 4 teams, we covered almost everything pretty well, including some things with 4 angles, which was really neat to see all different sides of some of the stories. But yeah, I never really worried about having enough content. And I knew I wanted to focus on building the storylines of these 3 main people because we were telling their story on how they built the show. We start from them being born all the way through what they built up after 12 years of this convention, which was this major 60,000 person event. And so you knew these characters before the show even started. So when you see them go through all of these hoops and hurdles, you're feeling a lot more for them, hopefully, because you know them now a lot better, as opposed to just, that guy's doing this. So you get to see their whole upbringing and kind of grow to like them a little bit more, I think.
Who are the 3 people in the film?
So the documentary follows the 2 owners, husband and wife team of Michael Broder and Sandy Martin, and then Josh Catrone is their head of operations. And so these are the 3 main people we follow throughout the documentary. The husband and wife team that started the show, and then Josh is running around. All 3 of them run around constantly putting out different fires all over the massive convention center.
Was there footage that you felt you shouldn't include? That you don't have to tell me what it was, but for whatever reason it was cut because you didn't have someone's approval or...
No, there was one storyline that we didn't have enough footage for that we probably could have used, but we made a deal with the police department pretty quickly over what we were allowed to shoot and what we were not allowed to shoot, such as if someone gets arrested and we videotape the arrest, that turns into evidence. They have to confiscate our footage and cameras, which we didn't want to have happen. So things like that, but we didn't need it. We built up the storylines up into the arresting point and you just didn't see the person go into the police car. It's pretty simple. All of the storylines that we cut were just not as exciting. I had probably over an hour of footage of parking problems. Easily could have done a whole movie on parking problems, but it's not nearly as exciting as a fire alarm going off or someone getting arrested or an ambulance taking somebody away. So So yeah, I'm not a big documentarian, and I'm not a big documentary fan, really. So for me, I kind of put it together as entertaining as possible and as fast-paced as possible, because that's the kind of movie I would want to watch. And a lot of people have told us that, like, this is a lot of fun. Like, it's so funny and it's really cool. So that was kind of the ultimate goal too.
So you wanted to make a light documentary, not a heavy, sort of message-driven. There's
definitely heavy parts in it because there was a lot going on in the country over that weekend. It's a very specific weekend, 2018 of July. And so you had the internment camps nearby in South Florida for all of the immigrant children. You had the Parkland Massacre happen nearby, the convention as well. That impacted the convention.
Oh.
There's a hurricane about to hit the state at the time. There are other things happening outside that was important to touch on that had a direct effect with the convention as well. And the Parkland was definitely the biggest factor that we touch on in the movie. And I had a lot of people that, every time we show it in theaters, that start bawling during that part, because it's such a difficult thing to watch and, to talk about again.
Why didn't you say no to this project, since you said you're not really a huge documentary fan?
They offered me money.
That's a good reason.
The brothers called me up and said, look, we want to do this project. You're the filmmaker we like and we know. And, we'll hire your crew. We'll put you guys up. We'll pay for the whole thing. And you can come down and kind of build this movie for us. And I was like, sure, of course. I would love to do, I like to do any kind of movie, really. So it was an opportunity, and it was already financed. And so I was like, yeah, sounds great. And I'd been to the convention multiple times, and they were good friends of mine. And it was only a 4-day shoot. So I was like, oh, we're going to shoot this entire movie in a week? That's great. That's perfect. That's really short. And so we ended up having about 3 months of post editing and then sound mix and score. So maybe about 5 or 6 months of post. But yeah, shooting it was really easy. At least it was fast, shooting it in only a few days. So I thought overall it sounded good, and I wasn't doing anything that week. So we made it happen.
What was the biggest challenge you faced while filming it?
The biggest challenge I think we faced filming it was just trying to be everywhere at once. It's a massive building, and there's 60,000 people, and you're pushing and shoving and trying to follow different things. And you would want to break, you're carrying a camera rig around for hours and hours and hours. And there was a couple times where we're like, okay, I got to grab some food. And I would step out, grab some food, and they'd be like, oh, you missed this thing. And it's like, well, of course I missed it, because I need to eat a piece of pizza for 10 hours of running around. But I think that was the physical challenges were the most challenging, I think, for us, just running around and just worrying that we were going to miss something, because it's an in the moment ordeal. And sometimes we'd break away to go shoot an interview or something, and then something may happen. But overall, I was never not confident about the movie being there. I thought we had plenty of pieces and plenty of storylines that'll all be fine. I think it was more so just about staying awake and not passing out while holding the camera and catching everything that you possibly could.
And so when you brought the footage back to start piecing it together, did you have an editor, or you did it yourself?
I did all the editing myself. And luckily I knew everything, because I was there for every single shoot. I was there for every interview, and I had lots of notes that I'd written down, like, I think we should touch on this, I think we should focus on this. So I had kind of a good timeline when we got back of how I was going to cut the movie. We had about 8 terabytes of footage and 16 hours of interviews to go through. Everything was 4K. We shot with 4 different cameras, and then time lapses and stuff. So it just took time, going through everything. And I made individual timelines for each storyline. So it'd be like, all right, they touch on this, drop it in that folder, touch on this, drop it in that folder. So I went through all the footage that we had and organized everything, and then just broke it into little scenes, little chunks, and started cutting it together like that.
And at what point do you show the rough cut to is it the 3 people involved, or are there more people?
I did a pretty good rough cut. I showed it to a couple friends here to get some notes before I showed it to them, some other filmmaking friends, just because I was like, does this make sense? I've been watching this for 10,000 hours. I don't even know what it is anymore. And got some notes based on that, made some tweaks, and then showed them a somewhat, like a decent rough cut. And I had nightmares that Mike was going to show up and like choke me in my sleep, like after watching the movie, because it's definitely a warts and all documentary. Like it shows the best and the worst, I think, of them too. And so they both were like, wow, this is a real movie. And I was like, yeah, that was the plan, was to make a real movie. And I think both of them, I mean, it was very difficult for them to watch, just to kind of see this is their entire life story.
Sure.
And we're showcasing their life story, and we're showing them in great moments and compromising moments, essentially. So, but overall, they were really, really happy with it. And then we just, locked picture and did the rest of post and knocked it out, and then did a few festivals. And then, and now it's out. It's streaming everywhere and Blu-ray and DVD, and it's good to go.
Do you have that talk with people beforehand? That I'm going to shoot things that, you're going to see all sides of you, and you may not like it.
I didn't have that conversation with them because he can be really scary sometimes. But I did tell them was, look, we're shooting this documentary, but you're still going to get to watch it and have final say. If we do something that's slanderous, like I don't want to slander anybody across the board. We only slander the building because the building caused a huge legal nightmare, which is explained in the documentary. We do slander them, but we don't slander the police. We don't slander the fans or the celebrities or anything like that because we don't need to. It's not that kind of a movie. And I was like, if you watch something where and you're like, we can't have this, I mean, let me know and we'll discuss it. But we didn't have anything like that. We didn't run into any problems. And even though some people were like, oh, well, this is a little too one-sided on their behalf. And I'm like, well, I guess it's only one-sided because I didn't interview all the people that caused problems. I didn't interview the kid that got arrested for stealing thousands of dollars worth of badges. I didn't interview the policeman that arrested someone. Like, there's things like that because it's not their story. It's this story. But I think it works out really well and it balances. I mean, you see them in crazy situations and then you see them having a good time. And so it's like every movie, it's a roller coaster, and it should be.
Sure, but I think it's so much different when it's a narrative, when people, they don't want to see themselves, even if they're having, let's say, a bad hair day or they have bags under their eyes, can you take that out? And you're like, well, no, I mean, that shows, that's you right there. I want to show you,
right?
Just a full human being, not only perfect,
And they were totally fine with that. And I think they understood the importance of it all. And it showcases what they go through. I mean, they're killing themselves trying to make this thing happen. And it really showcases that. And I think they were appreciative of that. And people that have watched it have told them, like, wow, like, you guys are crazy. And this is amazing that you do all this stuff to make this show happen, to make all of these people happy. And it really opened my eyes to conventions on why conventions are so important and so inclusive. And it's really incredible what they have become. And I really appreciate that now a lot more.